The emergence of Etruscan civilization from the archaeological record presents one of ancient history's most compelling puzzles. During the 12th century BC, as the Bronze Age collapsed across the Mediterranean and Mycenaean palaces crumbled in Greece, central Italy witnessed the gradual formation of what archaeologists term the Villanovan culture. Named after the site of Villanova near Bologna, where distinctive cremation urns were first discovered in 1853, this Iron Age culture would eventually transform into the sophisticated Etruscan civilization that dominated central Italy for centuries. The Villanovan settlements clustered primarily across the hills and river valleys of what would later become Etruria proper, the heartland stretching from the Arno River in the north to the Tiber in the south, encompassing modern Tuscany, western Umbria, and northern Lazio. These early communities established themselves on naturally defensible positions, hilltops surrounded by steep slopes, often at the confluence of rivers or streams that provided both water and transportation routes. The landscape itself shaped their development, with volcanic tufa rock formations offering excellent material for construction and excavation, while fertile valleys below supported agriculture and metallurgy, flourished thanks to abundant iron ore deposits in the Colline Metalliferae. Archaeological excavations at sites like Tarquinia, Veii and Cerveteri reveal the gradual sophistication of Villanovan material culture throughout the 10th and 9th centuries BC. The earliest phases show communities practicing cremation burial, placing ashes in distinctive biconical urns covered with inverted bowls. These ceramic vessels, handmade and decorated with geometric patterns in size before firing, represent some of the finest pottery production in contemporary Italy. The urns themselves were often housed in circular stone-lined pits or simple rectangular graves, accompanied by personal belongings that provide insights into daily life. Bronze fibulae for fastening clothing, iron knives and razors, ceramic cups and bowls, and occasionally bronze vessels that hint at emerging social stratification. The metalworking capabilities of these early communities distinguished them markedly from neighbouring populations. Villanovan smiths mastered both bronze and iron production, creating tools, weapons, and ornamental objects that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of metallurgical techniques. Bronze work included elaborate fibulae with geometric decorations, belt buckles, and horse bits that suggest equestrian culture. Iron production focused initially on practical implements, knives, spearheads, and agricultural tools, but gradually expanded to include more complex items like swords and decorative elements. The quality and quantity of metal objects found in Villanovan graves far exceeds that of contemporary sites elsewhere in central Italy, indicating both technological advancement and access to raw materials. Pottery production evolved significantly during this period, transitioning from purely functional vessels to items displaying artistic sophistication. Early Villanovan ceramics feature geometric patterns, parallel lines, hatchings, zigzags, and concentric circles, applied with remarkable precision. By the 9th century BC, potters began incorporating more complex designs, including stylized animals, human figures, and architectural elements. The famous hut urns found at several sites represent actual dwellings in miniature, complete with doors, windows, and roof details that provide valuable information about Villanovan architecture. These ceramic models show rectangular structures with thatched roofs, raised foundations, and decorative elements that would later appear in monumental Etruscan buildings. Settlement patterns during the Villanovan period reveal increasing social complexity and territorial organization. Individual communities grew larger and more densely populated, with evidence of specialized craft production areas within settlements. At Tarquinia, excavations have uncovered distinct quarters for metalworking, pottery production, and residential areas, suggesting occupational specialization and social stratification. The positioning of settlements also indicates strategic thinking about defense and resource control, with major sites commanding river crossings, mineral deposits, or agricultural zones. The transformation from Villanovan to recognisably Etruscan culture accelerated during the 8th century BC, coinciding with increased contact with Greek and Phoenician traders in the Mediterranean. This period, known as the Orientalising phase, brought dramatic changes in material culture, burial practices and social organisation. Cremation gradually gave way to inhumation burial, with the deceased laid out in chamber tombs carved from tufa rock. These underground chambers, initially simple rectangular rooms, grew increasingly elaborate with multiple chambers, carved architectural details, and painted decorations. Grave goods from this transitional period reflect growing wealth and social differentiation within Etruscan communities. Elite burials contain imported Greek pottery, Venetian silver vessels, Egyptian scarabs, and locally produced luxury items including gold jewellery, ivory carvings, and elaborate bronze vessels. The famous Regolini Galassi tomb at Cerveteri, dating to the mid-7th century BC, contained over 400 objects, including a gold pectoral weighing nearly a kilogram, demonstrating the extraordinary wealth accumulated by Etruscan elites through trade and local production. The question of Etruscan origins has generated scholarly debate for over 2 millennia, with ancient sources providing conflicting accounts. Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BC, claimed the Etruscans originated as Lydian colonists, who migrated from Asia Minor during a period of famine, bringing their customs and technologies to Italy. This Eastern origin theory found support in perceived similarities between Etruscan and Anatolian cultures, including religious practices, artistic styles, and linguistic elements. Dionysius of Halicarnassus, writing several centuries later, rejected the migration theory and argued for indigenous development, claiming the Etruscans were native Italians who developed their distinctive culture through internal evolution rather than external influence. Modern archaeological and genetic research has provided new perspectives on this ancient debate. DNA studies of Etruscan remains suggest complex population dynamics, with evidence for both indigenous continuity and external influences. The genetic data indicates that Etruscan populations shared ancestry with other Central Italian groups, while also showing connections to Eastern Mediterranean populations, supporting neither a pure migration model nor complete indigenous development. Instead, the evidence suggests a process of cultural transformation involving local populations who adopted and adapted external influences through trade, intermarriage, and cultural exchange. Linguistic evidence adds another layer to the origins debate. The Etruscan language, preserved in thousands of inscriptions, belongs to no known language family and shows no clear relationship to Indo-European languages spoken by neighbouring Italian peoples. Some scholars have identified potential connections to pre-Greek languages of the Aegean or Anatolian language families, while others argue for an indigenous Italian origin. The linguistic isolation of Etruscan may reflect either preservation of a pre-Indo-European substrate language or adoption of a foreign language by indigenous populations. The geographic expansion of recognisable Etruscan culture during the 8th and 7th centuries BC created a network of independent city-states across central Italy. Major centres emerged at strategic locations. Veii controlled the lower Tiber Valley and salt trade routes. Tarquinia dominated the coastal plains and harbours. Cerveteri commanded the Via Aurelia coastal road, and Vulci controlled inland routes and mineral resources. Each city developed its own political system, artistic traditions, and economic specializations, while maintaining cultural and religious connections with other Etruscan communities. The material culture that emerged during this formative period established patterns that would characterize Etruscan civilization for centuries. Distinctive pottery styles included bucero nero, a fine black ceramic produced through controlled firing techniques that created lustrous surfaces suitable for both daily use and ceremonial purposes. Metalworking reached new heights of sophistication, with Etruscan smiths producing elaborate bronze mirrors decorated with mythological scenes, intricate jewellery incorporating granulation and filigree techniques, and monumental bronze sculptures that rivaled Greek productions. Burial practices evolved into complex rituals that reflected Etruscan beliefs about death and the afterlife. Chamber tombs grew increasingly elaborate, with multiple rooms arranged around central courtyards, carved architectural details mimicking domestic spaces, and painted decorations depicting banquets, games, and mythological scenes. The famous Tomb of the Reliefs at Cerveteri contains carved representations of household objects, tools, and weapons that provide detailed information about daily life in aristocratic Etruscan families. Religious practices during this early period established foundations for later Etruscan theology and ritual. Archaeological evidence suggests worship of natural forces and chthonic deities, with particular attention to divination and communication with supernatural powers. Sacred spaces included natural features like springs, caves, and groves, as well as constructed temples and shrines. The practice of haruspicy, divination through examination of sacrificial animal organs, appears in the archaeological record through bronze liver models used for training priests in interpretive techniques. The agricultural foundation of early Etruscan society supported population growth and urbanization through intensive cultivation of cereals, grapes, and olives. Systematic drainage of marshy areas created additional farmland, while terracing of hillsides expanded cultivation into previously unusable terrain. Archaeological surveys reveal extensive field systems, storage facilities, and processing areas that indicate sophisticated agricultural management and surplus production necessary for supporting non-agricultural specialists. Trade networks established during this period connected Etruscan communities with Mediterranean civilizations and provided access to raw materials, luxury goods, and technological innovations. Etruscan merchants established trading posts along Italian coasts and islands, while foreign traders brought goods and ideas to Etruscan ports. This commercial activity generated wealth that supported artistic production, monumental construction, and social stratification that characterized mature Etruscan civilization. By the beginning of the 8th century BC, the scattered Villanovan settlements across central Italy began coalescing into something unprecedented in the Italian peninsula. Genuine urban centres with defined territorial boundaries, specialised populations, and monumental architecture that proclaimed their growing power to neighbours and rivals alike. This transformation marked the emergence of what historians recognise as the classical Etruscan city-state system, a network of independent polities that would dominate central Italian politics for the next 4 centuries. The process of urbanisation accelerated dramatically around 750 BC, driven by population growth, increased agricultural productivity, and expanding trade networks that brought both wealth and foreign influences to Etruscan communities. Archaeological evidence from major sites reveals systematic planning and construction projects that transformed hilltop villages into sophisticated urban centres. At Tarquinia, excavations have uncovered evidence of large-scale earthwork projects that levelled natural irregularities in the terrain to create flat building platforms, while extensive drainage systems channeled rainwater away from residential and ceremonial areas. The famous Monterozzi necropolis, with its thousands of chamber tombs carved into the tufa bedrock, required coordinated labour efforts involving hundreds of workers over multiple generations. The 12 principal cities that emerged during this period formed what later Roman sources term the Dodecapolis, though the exact composition of this league varied over time as individual cities rose and fell in prominence. Tarquinia established itself as perhaps the most influential of these centres, controlling extensive agricultural territories inland and maintaining harbours along the Tyrrhenian coast that facilitated trade with Greek colonies in southern Italy and Phoenician merchants from across the Mediterranean. The city's strategic position allowed its rulers to tax goods moving along coastal routes, while exploiting rich iron ore deposits in the nearby Tolfa Mountains. Cerveteri, known to the Etruscans as Caere, developed into another major power through its control of coastal trade routes and salt production facilities along the Tyrrhenian shore. The city's massive necropolis at Banditaccia, with its hundreds of tumulus tombs arranged along carefully planned streets, demonstrates the wealth accumulated by Cerveteri's merchant aristocracy during the 7th and 6th centuries BC. Individual tombs like the Tomb of the Capitals feature elaborate carved architectural details that replicate wooden construction techniques in stone, complete with roof beams, column capitals, and doorway mouldings that provide detailed information about contemporary building methods. Vulci emerged as the dominant power in the interior regions of southern Etruria, controlling river valleys that provided access to mineral resources and agricultural lands, while maintaining connections to coastal ports through tributary settlements. Archaeological surveys around Vulci have identified over 15,000 tombs in the surrounding countryside, indicating a population density that far exceeded contemporary settlements elsewhere in central Italy. The city's workshops produce some of the finest Etruscan pottery and metalwork, including elaborate bronze vessels decorated with mythological scenes and technical innovations like lost wax casting techniques that enabled production of large-scale sculptural works. Veii occupied perhaps the most strategically crucial position among the major Etruscan cities, situated on a plateau overlooking the Tiber River just 12 miles north of the growing Latin settlement at Rome. The city controlled the primary ford across the Tiber in this region, enabling its rulers to tax trade moving between central Italy and the Mediterranean coast, while maintaining access to the rich agricultural lands of the Tiber Valley. Veii's proximity to Rome would eventually prove both advantageous and fatal, as the two cities engaged in intermittent warfare for over a century before Veii's final destruction in 396 BC. The urban planning evident at these major centres reveals sophisticated understanding of hydraulic engineering, defensive architecture, and public space organisation. At Marzabotto, near Bologna, archaeologists have uncovered the most complete example of Etruscan urban planning, with a grid system of streets oriented according to religious principles that divided the city into distinct quarters for residential, commercial, and sacred activities. The main thoroughfares, paved with polygonal stone blocks, measured precisely 15 metres in width and featured raised sidewalks with drainage channels that carried rainwater to collecting basins outside the city walls. Drainage systems represented one of the most impressive achievements of Etruscan engineering during this period. The cuniculae, underground channels carved through solid rock, drained marshy areas around major cities while providing controlled water supplies for urban populations. Near Veii, the Ponte Sodo tunnel extends for nearly 70 metres through solid tufa rock, demonstrating the technical capabilities and organisational resources available to Etruscan engineers. These projects required precise surveying, coordinated labour gangs, and sophisticated understanding of hydraulic principles that enabled Etruscan cities to expand into previously uninhabitable areas. Monumental architecture during this period proclaimed the wealth and power of individual cities while establishing religious and civic centres that unified urban populations. The temple at Portonaccio, outside Veii, featured a distinctive Etruscan architectural style with wide-spreading eaves, colourful terracotta decorations, and sculptural programs that depicted mythological narratives. The famous Apollo of Veii, a life-sized terracotta statue that originally crowned the temple roof, demonstrates the sophisticated artistic capabilities of Etruscan sculptors working in the late 6th century BC. The figure's striding pose, elaborate drapery, and enigmatic smile reveal clear influences from contemporary Greek sculpture. while maintaining distinctively Etruscan characteristics in its proportions and decorative details. The emergence of powerful aristocratic families during this period fundamentally shaped Etruscan political and social organisation. Unlike the collective leadership structures evident in earlier Villanovan communities, the city-states developed hierarchical systems dominated by wealthy families who controlled land, trade networks, and religious institutions. These aristocratic clans, identifiable through recurring family names in tomb inscriptions, accumulated wealth through agricultural production, craft specialization, and commercial activities that extended across the Mediterranean. Tomb paintings and sculptural decorations provide detailed information about the lifestyle and values of these elite families. The Tomb of the Lionesses at Tarquinia depicts aristocratic banquets with elaborate furniture, imported Greek pottery, and musical entertainment that demonstrates the cosmopolitan culture of Etruscan elites. Male figures recline on couches while female participants, shown with equal prominence, engage in conversation and musical performance. The equal status accorded to women in these scenes reflects distinctive aspects of Etruscan society that distinguished it from contemporary Greek and Roman practices. The institution of the lucumo emerged as the characteristic form of Etruscan political leadership during this period. These priest-kings combined religious authority with secular power, serving as intermediaries between human communities and divine forces, while directing military campaigns, public works projects, and diplomatic relations with neighbouring cities. The Lucumones derive their authority from religious sanctions rather than purely secular sources, participating in elaborate rituals that demonstrated their ability to communicate with gods and interpret divine will through various forms of divination. Archaeological evidence for lucumonal authority appears in the rich grave goods and monumental tombs constructed for these rulers. The Regolini Galassi tomb at Cerveteri, dating to the mid-7th century BC, contained burial goods that demonstrate the extraordinary wealth and international connections of early Etruscan rulers. The tomb's occupants were buried with gold jewellery weighing several kilograms, silver vessels imported from Phoenician workshops, Greek pottery, Egyptian scarabs, and locally produced luxury items, including ivory carvings and elaborate bronze vessels decorated with mythological scenes. The religious foundations of lucumonal authority connected Etruscan political institutions to broader Mediterranean traditions while maintaining distinctive local characteristics. Etruscan rulers participated in complex rituals involving animal sacrifice, divination, and communication with chthonic deities that governed agricultural fertility, military success, and community welfare. The famous bronze liver from Piacenza, dating to the later period but reflecting earlier traditions, demonstrates the sophisticated theological system that supported Etruscan political authority through systematic interpretation of divine signs. Military organisation during this period reflected the hierarchical structure of Etruscan society, while incorporating technological innovations that enhanced the effectiveness of city-state armies. Elite warriors fought as heavy infantry equipped with bronze armour, iron weapons, and distinctive crested helmets that proclaimed their status and regional affiliations. The famous warrior of Capistrano, though from the Picena region rather than Etruria proper, illustrates the type of aristocratic military equipment that characterized central Italian warfare during this period. Archaeological evidence from Etruscan tombs includes iron spearheads, bronze swords, and defensive equipment that demonstrates both local production capabilities and adaptation of foreign military technologies. The relationship between individual city-states and the broader Etruscan cultural community created a complex political landscape that combined fierce local independence with shared religious and cultural institutions. The Dodecapolis functioned as a loose confederation rather than a unified state, with individual cities maintaining sovereignty over their territories while participating in common religious festivals and occasionally coordinating military campaigns against external enemies. The sanctuary at Volsini served as a meeting place for representatives from the 12 cities, where they conducted religious ceremonies honouring shared deities and discussed matters of common concern. Trade networks established during this period connected Etruscan cities with Greek colonies in southern Italy, Phoenician merchants in the western Mediterranean, and emerging markets in Central and Northern Europe. Etruscan merchants established trading posts at strategic locations throughout the Mediterranean, while foreign traders brought exotic goods and technological innovations to Etruscan ports. Archaeological evidence from sites like Gravisca, the port of Tarquinia, reveals extensive commercial activities involving Greek, Phoenician and Egyptian merchants who established permanent trading facilities in Etruscan territory. The Greek colonization of southern Italy during the 8th and 7th centuries BC brought Etruscan cities into direct contact with Hellenic culture and created both opportunities for profitable trade and sources of military conflict. Greek colonies like Cumae, established around 750 BC, competed with Etruscan cities for control of trade routes and territorial expansion in Campania. The Battle of Cumae in 524 BC marked the first major military confrontation between Etruscan forces and Greek colonists, resulting in an Etruscan defeat that limited their expansion southward while demonstrating the military capabilities of both sides. Relations with the nascent Roman settlement in Latium developed along different lines, characterized by both conflict and cooperation as the two peoples competed for control of the Tiber Valley, while maintaining extensive cultural and commercial exchanges. Archaeological evidence from Rome during this period reveals strong Etruscan influences in architecture, religious practices, and material culture that suggest close relationships between Roman and Etruscan elites. The traditional Roman accounts of Etruscan kings ruling Rome during the 6th century BC, while historically problematic, reflect the reality of extensive Etruscan involvement in early Roman development. The Tarquin dynasty, according to Roman historical tradition, represented the culmination of Etruscan influence in Roman affairs during the late 6th century BC. Whether or not individual Tarquin rulers actually governed Rome, the archaeological evidence clearly demonstrates extensive Etruscan cultural influence in Roman territory during this period. The construction of the Temple of Jupiter, Optimus Maximus on the Capitoline Hill, the development of the Forum Romanum as a civic centre, and the implementation of drainage systems that transformed the marshy areas of early Rome all reflect Etruscan engineering and architectural expertise. The economic foundations of Etruscan city-states during this period rested on diversified production systems that combined agricultural surplus, craft specialization, and commercial activities. Systematic agricultural development transformed the landscape around major cities through drainage projects, terracing, and intensive cultivation techniques that supported growing urban populations. The production of wine and olive oil for export markets generated wealth that funded monumental construction projects and luxury imports, while grain production provided the dietary foundation for population growth. Craft production reached new levels of sophistication during this period, with specialized workshops producing goods for both local consumption and export markets. Etruscan metalworkers developed advanced techniques for bronze casting, iron forging, and precious metal working that enabled production of both utilitarian objects and luxury items. The famous Etruscan mirrors, decorated with mythological scenes executed in fine-line engraving, demonstrate the artistic capabilities of metalworkers who combined technical expertise with sophisticated understanding of Greek mythological narratives. Pottery production evolved from the earlier Villanovan traditions to incorporate new techniques and decorative styles that reflected increasing contact with Mediterranean civilizations. The development of Bacchero pottery, with its distinctive black surface and metallic sheen, represented a uniquely Etruscan contribution to ceramic technology that found markets throughout the Mediterranean region. Later, red figure pottery produced in Etruscan workshops adapted Greek techniques while maintaining distinctive local characteristics in subject matter and decorative details. The sophisticated urban centres that emerged across Etruria by 600 BC housed complex societies organised around rigid hierarchical structures that governed every aspect of daily life, from religious ceremonies to commercial transactions. Archaeological evidence from tomb paintings, inscriptions and burial goods reveals a social pyramid with clearly defined strata, each possessing distinct rights, obligations and cultural markers that distinguish their members from those above and below them in the social order. At the apex of Etruscan society stood the aristocratic families whose power derived from land ownership, control of trade networks, and hereditary religious authority. These elite clans, identifiable through recurring gentilicial names carved on tomb walls and funerary monuments, accumulated vast wealth through agricultural estates worked by dependent labourers, craft workshops producing luxury goods for Mediterranean markets, and commercial ventures that extended from the Black Sea to the Atlantic coast of Spain. The gens Spurina at Tarquinia, documented through multiple generations of elaborate tomb inscriptions, controlled extensive territories in the Marta River Valley, while maintaining trading relationships with Greek colonies in Sicily and Phoenician merchants in Sardinia. The material culture of aristocratic families reflected their international connections and sophisticated tastes through imported luxury goods, elaborate architectural settings, and artistic commissions that proclaim their status to contemporaries and descendants alike. The tomb of the Baron at Tarquinia depicts aristocratic males wearing richly embroidered tunics with purple borders, gold fibulae securing their cloaks, and elaborate jewellery including torques, bracelets and finger rings that demonstrate the goldsmith's art at its finest. These figures carry curved staffs topped with bronze ornaments, symbols of their authority that appear consistently in aristocratic tomb paintings across different Etruscan cities. Beneath the aristocratic stratum emerged a substantial middle class of craftsmen, merchants and small landowners whose economic activities sustained the urban centres and generated the wealth that supported aristocratic lifestyles. Archaeological evidence from residential areas in cities like Marzabotto and Aquarossa reveals comfortable houses with multiple rooms, private courtyards, and sophisticated amenities including hypercoursed heating systems and private wells. These middle-class dwellings featured painted wall decorations, quality pottery for daily use, and bronze implements that indicate prosperity without the ostentatious luxury displayed by aristocratic families. Craftsmen occupied particularly important positions within this middle stratum, their specialised skills generating products that found markets throughout the Mediterranean world. Metalworkers organised into workshops that produced everything from agricultural tools and weapons to elaborate decorative objects and religious implements. The bronze mirrors manufactured in Etruscan cities like Vulci and Praeneste featured mythological scenes executed with extraordinary technical precision, their reflective surfaces polished to mirror-like perfection, while their backs displayed narrative compositions that required extensive knowledge of Greek mythological traditions. Master craftsmen signed their works with pride, their names preserved in inscriptions that identify individual artists like Novios Plautios, whose bronze sister from Praeneste demonstrates the highest levels of artistic achievement. Pottery workshops employed dozens of workers in specialised roles, from clay preparation and wheel throwing to painting and firing operations that required precise temperature control and timing. The red figure pottery produced in Etruscan centres during the 4th and 3rd centuries BC rivaled contemporary Athenian productions in technical quality, while developing distinctive iconographic programs that reflected local mythological traditions and religious beliefs. Master painters like the artist known as the Mikali painter created narrative compositions of remarkable complexity, depicting scenes from Etruscan versions of Greek myths, alongside indigenous stories that provide insights into local cultural values and religious practices. Agricultural workers formed the largest segment of Etruscan society, though their lives remain less well documented in the archaeological record due to the perishable nature of their material possessions and the rural locations of their activities. Systematic field surveys around major Etruscan cities have identified hundreds of small farmsteads and rural settlements that house the agricultural population, responsible for producing the food surpluses that supported urban life. These rural sites reveal modest stone buildings with thatched roofs, storage facilities for grain and oil, and workshops for processing agricultural products and manufacturing simple tools and pottery for local use. The relationship between landowners and agricultural workers varied considerably across different regions and time periods, ranging from free peasant proprietors working small plots to dependent labourers bound to large estates owned by aristocratic families. Inscriptions from later periods mention categories of rural workers including lautni, who appear to have been freed slaves or clients attached to particular families, and etera, whose exact status remains unclear but who seem to have occupied positions intermediate between free and slave labour. The complexity of these relationships reflects the sophisticated economic organisation required to support the large urban populations and extensive trade networks that characterised mature Etruscan civilization. At the bottom of the social hierarchy stood slaves, whose labour supported every aspect of Etruscan economic and domestic life. Archaeological evidence for slavery appears in tomb paintings depicting servants attending banquets, inscriptions recording manumissions and slave ownership, and the material remains of simple dwellings that housed unfree populations. The tomb of the augurs at Tarquinia includes a scene showing a masked figure called Fursu, leading a man with a sack over his head toward a fierce dog, likely depicting a form of gladiatorial combat involving condemned slaves or prisoners of war. Slaves in Etruscan society came from various sources, including prisoners captured in warfare, individuals sold by slave traders operating throughout the Mediterranean, and children born to slave parents. The treatment of slaves varied considerably depending on their skills, their owners' wealth, and their specific roles within households or workshops. Skilled slaves working as craftsmen, scribes, or household managers could achieve relatively comfortable living conditions and might eventually earn manumission, while agricultural slaves and mine workers faced harsh conditions and limited prospects for advancement. The position of women in Etruscan society differed markedly from their status in contemporary Greek and early Roman communities, with archaeological evidence suggesting greater freedom of movement, legal rights, and social participation than their counterparts elsewhere in the ancient Mediterranean. Tomb paintings consistently depict women participating in banquets alongside men, reclining on couches and engaging in conversation, rather than sitting separately or remaining silent as Greek customs required. The Tomb of the Leopards at Tarquinia shows elegantly dressed women with elaborate hairstyles and jewellery sharing wine with male companions, while musicians provide entertainment. Etruscan women retained their birth names after marriage, a practice documented in thousands of tomb inscriptions that record both maternal and paternal lineages for deceased individuals. This naming system suggests that women maintained connections to their birth families and may have possessed inheritance rights that allowed them to transmit property to their children. The bilingual inscriptions from later periods occasionally provide Latin translations of Etruscan names, confirming that married women continue to use their original gentilicial names alongside their husbands' family designations. Legal documents and inscriptions indicate that Etruscan women could own property, engage in commercial transactions, and participate in religious activities as priestesses and ritual specialists. The tomb of Orcus at Tarquinia depicts a female figure identified as Velia Velcha, who appears to hold a position of religious authority, her elaborate costume and ritual implements suggesting her role as a priestess or diviner. Archaeological evidence from sanctuaries includes dedicatory inscriptions by women who commissioned votive offerings and architectural elements, demonstrating their participation in public religious life. The economic foundations of Etruscan society rested on diversified production systems that exploited the natural resources of central Italy while maintaining extensive commercial networks throughout the Mediterranean world. Agriculture provided the basic subsistence for the population while generating surpluses for trade, with systematic cultivation of grains, grapes and olives supported by sophisticated irrigation and drainage systems. The fertile volcanic soils of central Italy proved particularly suitable for vine cultivation, and Etruscan wines gained recognition throughout the ancient world for their quality and distinctive characteristics. Mining operations in the Colline Metallifere and other mineral-rich regions supplied raw materials for local metalworking industries while generating exports that funded imports of luxury goods and exotic materials. Iron ore deposits near Populonia supported extensive smelting operations that produced both finished tools and weapons for local use and raw iron for export to markets lacking local sources of the metal. Copper mining in the same region provided material for bronze production, while smaller deposits of silver and lead contributed to the monetary systems that facilitated commercial transactions. The island of Elba, controlled by Populonia, contained some of the richest iron ore deposits in the Mediterranean world. With mining operations that continued for centuries and left extensive archaeological remains, the scale of these operations required substantial labour forces, sophisticated extraction techniques, and efficient transportation systems to move ore from mining sites to smelting facilities on the mainland. Archaeological surveys have identified numerous mining shafts, processing areas, and workers' settlements that demonstrate the industrial scale of Etruscan mineral extraction. Maritime trade connected Etruscan cities with markets and suppliers throughout the Mediterranean, with Etruscan merchants establishing trading posts and commercial relationships from the Black Sea to the Atlantic coast of Spain. The port facilities at Pyrgi, serving Caere, included extensive warehouses, ship repair facilities, and residential quarters for foreign merchants who conducted business in Etruscan territory. Archaeological excavations have recovered pottery, coins, and other artifacts from across the Mediterranean world, demonstrating the international scope of Etruscan commercial activities. Etruscan ships, depicted in tomb paintings and described in literary sources, ranged from small coastal vessels used for local trade to large merchant ships capable of crossing the Mediterranean with substantial cargoes. The naval capabilities of Etruscan cities enabled them to compete with Greek and Phoenician merchants while protecting their commercial interests through military action when necessary. The Battle of Alalia in 540 BC, fought between Etruscan and Carthaginian forces against Greek colonists, demonstrated the naval power that Etruscan cities could deploy in defence of their commercial territories. Specialised craftsmanship reached extraordinary levels of sophistication in Etruscan workshops, with master artisans developing techniques and artistic styles that influenced Mediterranean art for centuries. Bronzeworking achieved particular prominence, with Etruscan smiths mastering complex casting techniques that enabled production of large-scale sculptural works, intricate decorative objects, and precision instruments for religious and scientific purposes. The Chimera of Arezzo, discovered in the 16th century, demonstrates the technical mastery and artistic vision of Etruscan bronze workers who created mythological creatures with anatomical accuracy and dynamic poses that convey both power and grace. Jewellery production incorporated advanced techniques including granulation, filigree, and repousse work that created ornaments of extraordinary delicacy and beauty. The gold wreaths, earrings, and necklaces found in aristocratic tombs feature microscopic decorative elements applied with precision that modern jewellers struggle to replicate. These pieces often incorporated imported materials including amber from the Baltic region, ivory from Africa, and precious stones from various Mediterranean sources, demonstrating the international connections of Etruscan craft industries. Religious practices permeated every aspect of Etruscan society, with elaborate theological systems that governed political authority, economic activities, and social relationships through complex networks of divine influences and supernatural forces. The Etruscan pantheon included indigenous deities alongside adopted Greek and Oriental divinities, creating a syncretic religious system that reflected the cosmopolitan character of Etruscan civilization. Tinia, the sky god equivalent to Greek Zeus and Roman Jupiter, presided over a divine hierarchy that included Uni, Minerva, and numerous specialized deities governing particular aspects of natural and human activity. Priestly classes maintained the religious traditions that legitimized political authority and provided guidance for individual and community decision-making through various forms of divination. The haruspices, specialists in examining sacrificial animal organs, developed sophisticated interpretive systems that connected observed phenomena with divine intentions and future events. Bronze liver models used for training these priests features detailed anatomical divisions corresponding to different deities and cosmic forces, demonstrating the scientific precision applied to religious practices. The Disciplina Etrusca, the body of religious knowledge that governed Etruscan ritual practice, integrated beliefs about divine will with practical guidance for urban planning, agricultural activities, and political decision-making. Cities were founded according to religious principles that required ritual ploughing of boundaries, consecration of sacred spaces, and establishment of temples oriented according to cosmic principles. The integration of religious authority with secular power created political systems in which rulers derived legitimacy from their ability to communicate with divine forces and interpret supernatural signs. Sacred spaces included both natural features like springs, caves, and groves, and constructed temples, shrines, and sanctuaries that served as focal points for community religious life. The sanctuary at Pergae included multiple temples dedicated to different deities, with architectural programs that incorporated Etruscan, Greek, and Phoenician elements, reflecting the international character of the port community. Votive deposits from sanctuaries contained thousands of offerings, including bronze figurines, pottery vessels, and personal ornaments that demonstrate the active participation of all social classes in religious observances. The religious framework that governed every aspect of Etruscan life extended far beyond simple worship or seasonal festivals, encompassing a comprehensive theological system known as the Etrusca Disciplina that provided detailed guidance for interpreting divine will, conducting proper rituals, and maintaining harmonious relationships between human communities and supernatural forces. This sacred body of knowledge, transmitted through generations of specialized priests and preserved in religious texts that Roman sources claim filled entire libraries, established the foundation for political authority, urban planning, agricultural practices, and individual decision-making throughout Etruscan civilization. The Etrusca Disciplina consisted of three primary components that addressed different aspects of divine human interaction. The Libri Haruspicini contained detailed instructions for examining sacrificial animal organs, particularly the liver, to determine divine intentions and predict future events. These texts included anatomical diagrams showing the correspondence between specific liver sections and various deities, with interpretive guidelines that connected observed abnormalities to particular meanings. The bronze liver model discovered at Piacenza, dating to the 2nd or 1st century BC, preserves this knowledge in physical form, its surface divided into 40 sections labelled with the names of deities who governed different aspects of cosmic and terrestrial activity. The Libri Fulgurales provided comprehensive guidance for interpreting lightning and thunder, phenomena that Etruscans considered direct communications from the gods. These texts categorized different types of lightning according to their origins, trajectories, and timing, with each variety carrying specific meanings about divine approval or displeasure regarding human activities. The observation and interpretation of lightning required specialized training and equipment, including bronze instruments for measuring angles and directions that enabled priests to determine which deity had sent particular messages and what responses were required from human recipients. The Libri Rituales contained instructions for founding cities, consecrating temples, organizing political institutions, and conducting the ceremonies that marked important transitions in individual and community life. These texts specified the proper procedures for ritual ploughing that established city boundaries, the orientation of temples according to cosmic principles, and the division of urban space into sacred and secular areas. The famous ritual for founding new settlements required the future ruler to plough a circular furrow using a bronze ploughshare drawn by a white bull and cow, lifting the plough at designated points where gates would be constructed to avoid creating breaks in the sacred boundary. The Etruscan pantheon evolved through centuries of cultural contact and religious syncretism, incorporating indigenous Italian deities alongside adopted Greek and Oriental divinities to create a complex theological system that reflected the cosmopolitan character of Etruscan civilization. At its head stood Tinia, the sky god whose thunderbolts served as the primary means of divine communication with human communities. Unlike his Greek counterpart Zeus, who wielded unlimited power over lightning, Tinia shared this authority with a council of 12 superior deities who could authorize the most powerful thunderbolts that revealed the ultimate will of fate itself. Uni, the queen of the gods and protector of women and marriage, occupied a position of particular prominence in Etruscan religious practice. Her sanctuary at Pyrgi, the port of Caere, attracted worshippers from across the Mediterranean world and housed one of the most important religious complexes in central Italy. The bilingual inscriptions discovered at Pyrgi, written in both Etruscan and Phoenician, identify Uni with the Phoenician goddess Astarte, demonstrating the syncretic processes that enabled Etruscan religion to incorporate foreign deities while maintaining distinctive local characteristics. Minerva, goddess of wisdom, warfare and craftsmanship, presided over the intellectual and artistic achievements that distinguished Etruscan civilization. Her cult centres included workshops where master craftsmen sought divine inspiration for their creations, and her festivals featured competitions among artists and artisans that encouraged technical innovation and artistic excellence. Archaeological evidence from sanctuary sites includes thousands of votive offerings depicting the tools and products of various crafts, from bronze mirrors and jewellery to pottery and architectural elements, demonstrating the active participation of craftsmen in religious observances. The chthonic deities who governed death, the underworld and agricultural fertility occupied equally important positions in Etruscan religious thought. Their worship centred on elaborate rituals that ensured proper transitions between life and death, while maintaining the cosmic balance necessary for continued prosperity. Ater, ruler of the underworld, appears in tomb paintings as a bearded figure wearing a wolfskin headdress. His realm depicted as a place of judgment where the souls of the deceased faced evaluation of their earthly conduct. Persephone, his consort and queen of the dead, governed the seasonal cycles that connected agricultural fertility with the mysteries of death and rebirth. The integration of Greek mythological narratives with indigenous Etruscan traditions created distinctive versions of familiar stories that reflected local values and religious beliefs. The Etruscan version of the Trojan War cycle, preserved in artistic representations and literary fragments, emphasized different characters and episodes than Greek sources, with particular attention to the role of Aeneas as founder of the Italian peoples. The Francois tomb at Vulci contains painted scenes depicting both Greek heroes and Etruscan historical figures engaged in mythological battles that blur the boundaries between legendary and historical narratives. Local deities and supernatural beings populated the Etruscan religious landscape alongside the major gods. Their cults centered on specific locations, natural features, or community functions that required divine protection and guidance. Voltumna served as the principal deity of the Etruscan Confederation, his sanctuary at Volsini hosting annual gatherings where representatives from the 12 cities conducted religious ceremonies and discussed matters of common concern. The god's association with seasonal change and agricultural fertility made his cult particularly important for coordinating agricultural activities across different Etruscan territories. Divination practices extended far beyond the examination of sacrificial animal organs to include numerous techniques for determining divine will and predicting future events. The observation of bird flight patterns, documented in literary sources and artistic representations, required specialized knowledge of different species' behavior, seasonal migration patterns, and the significance of various flight formations. Priests trained in this discipline could interpret the messages conveyed by eagles soaring across temple precincts, flocks of ravens gathering in particular locations, or the unusual behavior of domestic fowl that indicated supernatural influences. The casting of lots using dice, beans, or other objects provided another method for obtaining divine guidance on specific questions or decisions. Archaeological excavations at sanctuary sites have recovered numerous dice made from bone, bronze, and precious materials, their surfaces marked with symbols or numbers that corresponded to different interpretive categories. The complexity of these divination systems required extensive training and memorization of interpretive traditions that connected observed phenomena with specific meanings and appropriate responses. Haruspice, the examination of sacrificial animal organs, represented the most sophisticated and prestigious form of Etruscan divination, its practitioners serving as advisors to rulers and communities throughout the Mediterranean world. Roman sources record numerous instances of haruspices being consulted during political crises, military campaigns, and natural disasters, their interpretations influencing major decisions that affected the fate of nations. The technical precision required for this practice involved detailed knowledge of animal anatomy, the significance of various abnormalities and discolorations, and the complex correspondences between organ sections and divine influences. The training of haruspices began in childhood and continued for decades, with master practitioners passing their knowledge to selected students through intensive instruction that combined theoretical learning with practical experience. The bronze liver models used for training featured detailed anatomical divisions corresponding to different deities and cosmic forces, their surfaces inscribed with the names of gods and interpretive guidelines that connected observed phenomena with specific meanings. Students learned to identify dozens of different types of abnormalities, each carrying particular significance for the questions posed by their clients. The elaborate burial customs that characterized Etruscan civilization reflected sophisticated beliefs about death, the afterlife, and the continued existence of the deceased in supernatural realms. The transition from cremation to inhumation burial during the 7th century BC accompanied the development of complex theological concepts about the soul's journey after death and the requirements for successful passage to the underworld. Chamber tombs carved from tufa rock provided permanent dwellings for the deceased, their architectural features and decorative programs creating domestic environments that enabled continued existence in death. The necropolis at Cerveteri preserves the most extensive evidence for Etruscan burial practices. Its hundreds of tumulus tombs arranged along carefully planned streets that replicated the organization of living cities. Individual tombs like the Tomb of the Reliefs feature carved representations of household objects, furniture, weapons, and personal belongings that provided everything necessary for comfortable existence in the afterlife. The precision of these carved details, from kitchen utensils and farming tools to jewellery and cosmetic implements, demonstrates the Etruscan belief that death represented a continuation of life rather than its termination. Tomb architecture evolved from simple rectangular chambers to complex multi-room structures that accommodated extended families over multiple generations. The Tomb of the Volumni at Perugia contains 7 chambers arranged around a central atrium, each room designated for specific family members according to their status and relationships within the clan hierarchy. The architectural details replicate contemporary domestic architecture in stone, with carved ceiling beams, column capitals, and doorway mouldings that provide detailed information about Etruscan building techniques and decorative preferences. The painted decorations that adorned tomb walls created narrative programs that depicted the deceased's life, religious beliefs, and expectations for existence in the afterlife. The Tomb of the Augurs at Tarquinia features scenes of funeral games including wrestling matches, chariot races, and gladiatorial combats that honoured the deceased, while providing entertainment for both living mourners and supernatural observers. The athletic competitions depicted in these paintings follow Greek models while incorporating distinctively Etruscan elements, including the masked figure called Fursu, who appears to orchestrate violent spectacles involving condemned prisoners or slaves. Banquet scenes appear with remarkable frequency in tomb paintings, depicting the deceased participating in elaborate feasts that continue throughout eternity. The Tomb of the Leopards at Tarquinia shows elegantly dressed figures reclining on couches, while servants provide food and wine. Musicians perform on double flutes and lyres, and dancers entertain the assembled company. The equal participation of women in these scenes, shown reclining alongside men and engaging in conversation, reflects the distinctive character of Etruscan social customs that differed markedly from contemporary Greek and Roman practices. The artistic programs of painted tombs often incorporated mythological narratives that connected the deceased's fate with legendary heroes and divine figures who had successfully navigated the challenges of death and achieved favourable positions in the afterlife. The Tomb of Orcus at Tarquinia depicts scenes from the underworld featuring both Greek mythological figures like Persephone and Hades, alongside Etruscan deities and demons who governed the realm of the dead. These paintings demonstrate the sophisticated theological concepts that guided Etruscan beliefs about posthumous existence and the requirements for achieving favourable treatment in the supernatural realm. The gradual evolution of tomb painting styles reflects changing religious beliefs and cultural influences over several centuries of Etruscan civilization. Early tombs from the 6th and 5th centuries BC feature optimistic scenes of banqueting, dancing, and athletic competitions that suggest confident expectations about posthumous happiness. Later paintings from the 4th and 3rd centuries BC increasingly depict darker themes, including demons, scenes of judgment, and the dangers that souls face during their journey to the underworld, reflecting growing anxiety about death and the afterlife that accompanied the political and military pressures facing Etruscan cities. The demons and supernatural beings that populated Etruscan beliefs about the afterlife included both benevolent guides who assisted souls in their posthumous journey and malevolent creatures who threatened the unwary or unprepared. Charon, depicted as a blue-skinned figure with pointed ears and hooked nose, served as Psychopomp who guided souls to the underworld, his appearance in tomb paintings indicating his role in facilitating successful transitions from life to death. Tucholcha, a more frightening demon with snake hair and vulture's beak, represented the dangers that awaited those who had lived improper lives or failed to conduct appropriate funeral rituals. The influence of Etruscan religious practices on Roman traditions extended far beyond simple adoption of individual deities or ritual procedures to encompass fundamental concepts about divine human relationships, political legitimacy, and the proper conduct of public and private religious observances. The Roman practice of taking auspices before important decisions derived directly from Etruscan divination traditions, while the architectural principles governing temple construction and urban planning reflected Etruscan religious concepts about sacred space and cosmic order. The continued employment of Etruscan haruspices by Roman officials throughout the Republican and Imperial periods demonstrates the enduring respect for Etruscan religious expertise and the practical value of their interpretive skills. The artistic traditions that emerged from Etruscan workshops during the 6th century BC represented a sophisticated fusion of indigenous Italian craftsmanship with Mediterranean influences, creating distinctive styles that would profoundly impact Roman artistic development, while establishing Etruria as one of the premier cultural centres of the ancient world. This artistic flowering coincided with the peak of Etruscan political power and commercial prosperity, as wealthy patrons commissioned monumental sculptures, elaborate architectural programs, and luxury objects that demonstrated both individual status and collective cultural achievement. Etruscan sculptors working in terracotta developed techniques that enabled production of life-sized figures with remarkable anatomical accuracy and expressive power. The Apollo of Veii, created around 510 BC for the Portinaccio temple, exemplifies the distinctive characteristics of mature Etruscan sculpture. Standing nearly 6 feet tall, the figure strides forward with dynamic energy, his elaborately pleated chiton clinging to his muscular torso, while flowing behind him in carefully modelled folds that demonstrate the sculptor's mastery of drapery representation. The god's face features the characteristic Etruscan smile, a subtle expression that suggests divine knowledge while maintaining an approachable humanity that distinguished Etruscan religious art from the more austere traditions of contemporary Greek sculpture. The technical achievements evident in the Apollo reveal sophisticated understanding of ceramic technology and firing techniques that enabled Etruscan artists to create large-scale sculptures without the structural weaknesses that plagued earlier attempts at monumental terracotta work. The figure was constructed using the hollow building technique, with walls of uniform thickness that prevented cracking during the firing process while reducing weight sufficiently to permit installation on temple rooftops. The surface treatment includes traces of original polychromy, with red pigment preserved on the lips and hair bands that indicate the vivid coloration that originally enhanced the sculpture's visual impact. Contemporary with the Apollo, the sculptural program from the Portinaccio temple included additional figures representing Heracles, Minerva, and other deities engaged in mythological narratives that decorated the temple's ridgepole and acroteria. These sculptures demonstrate the collaborative workshop practices that characterized Etruscan artistic production, with multiple craftsmen contributing specialized skills to create unified decorative programs. The consistency of style and technical execution across different figures suggests systematic training methods and established artistic traditions that enabled workshops to produce complex commissions requiring coordination among numerous specialists. Bronze sculpture achieved equally impressive results through the application of advanced casting techniques that enabled Etruscan artists to create both solid cast works and large hollow cast pieces using the lost wax process. The Chimera of Arezzo, discovered in 1553 and dating to the 4th century BC, demonstrates the technical mastery achieved by Etruscan bronze workers in creating mythological creatures that combined anatomical accuracy with supernatural elements. The creature's lion body features carefully observed muscular definition, while the goat head emerging from its back and the serpent tail create a convincing representation of the legendary monster. The bronze surface preserves ancient repair work where the creature's tail was reattached, indicating that the sculpture was valued sufficiently to warrant restoration in antiquity. The Etruscan mastery of bronze casting extended to architectural elements, including door fittings, decorative panels, and structural components that enhanced the visual impact of major buildings while demonstrating the wealth and sophistication of their patrons. The bronze doors of the temple at Pyrgi featured repousse panels depicting mythological scenes, executed with extraordinary precision, their surfaces enriched with silver inlay work that created dramatic contrasts between different narrative elements. These doors required collaboration between metalworkers, silversmiths, and artists who designed the iconographic programs that connected architectural decoration with religious themes. Portrait sculpture developed distinctive characteristics that emphasized individual personality and social status rather than idealized beauty or divine attributes. The so-called Brutus in the Capitoline museums, though its Etruscan attribution remains debated, exemplifies the realistic portrait style that emerged from Etruscan workshops during the 3rd century BC. The bronze head features carefully observed facial characteristics, including lined skin, asymmetrical features, and a penetrating gaze that suggests the subject's intelligence and determination. This emphasis on individual characterization would profoundly influence Roman portrait sculpture, which adopted Etruscan techniques and aesthetic preferences while developing them in new directions. The production of bronze mirrors represented one of the most distinctive achievements of Etruscan metalworking, with workshops in cities like Vulci and Praeneste, creating decorated mirrors that found markets throughout the Mediterranean world. These circular bronze discs featured polished reflecting surfaces on one side and elaborate engraved decorations on the reverse, typically depicting mythological scenes executed with linear precision that rivals the finest Greek vase painting. The mirror of Tenia and Minerva from Vulci shows the two deities in intimate conversation, their figures rendered with flowing lines that capture both divine majesty and human emotion while demonstrating the artist's sophisticated understanding of anatomy and drapery. The iconographic programs of Etruscan mirrors often featured uniquely Italian versions of Greek mythological narratives, with local deities and heroes integrated into familiar stories to create distinctive cultural expressions. The mirror depicting the Judgment of Paris includes Etruscan inscriptions identifying the figures with their local names, while the composition incorporates landscape elements and architectural details that reflect contemporary Etruscan artistic preferences. These adaptations demonstrate the creative processes through which Etruscan artists transformed borrowed mythological material into expressions of local cultural identity. Painting traditions in Etruscan art encompassed both monumental tomb decorations and portable works on wood, canvas, and other perishable materials that have largely disappeared from the archaeological record. The tomb paintings that survive provide extensive evidence for Etruscan artistic techniques, iconographic preferences, and stylistic development over several centuries of cultural evolution. The earliest painted tombs from the late 6th century BC feature relatively simple compositions, with figures arranged in frieze-like formations against plain backgrounds, while later works demonstrate increasing sophistication in spatial representation, colour modelling, and narrative complexity. The tomb of the Triclinium at Tarquinia, painted around 470 BC, exemplifies the mature style of Etruscan tomb painting with its sophisticated use of colour, naturalistic figure representation, and complex spatial organisation. The main chamber features a banquet scene with elegantly dressed figures reclining on couches arranged around the walls, their poses and gestures creating a sense of animated conversation and social interaction. The painters employed a sophisticated colour palette, including various shades of red, blue, yellow and green applied over carefully prepared white ground that enhanced the brilliance of individual pigments while creating harmonious overall compositions. The technical execution of tomb paintings required extensive preparation of wall surfaces through multiple layers of plaster application, with the final intonaco layer providing a smooth white ground suitable for fresco technique. Etruscan painters worked while the plaster remained damp, allowing pigments to bond chemically with the lime content to create permanent decorations that have survived for over 2 millennia. The speed required for fresco work necessitated careful planning and skilled execution, with artists transferring preliminary designs to walls through various methods including pouncing, grid systems, and direct sketching. Architectural innovation represented perhaps the most influential aspect of Etruscan cultural achievement, with engineering techniques and design principles that would fundamentally shape Roman building practices, and, through Roman influence, the architectural traditions of Western civilization. The Etruscan development of the true arch, constructed using wedge-shaped voussoirs that transferred structural loads through compression rather than requiring massive supporting walls, revolutionized building possibilities and enabled construction of spans previously impossible with post and lintel systems. The Cloaca Maxima in Rome, traditionally attributed to the Etruscan king Tarquinius Superbus, demonstrates the practical application of arch construction to major engineering projects. The Great Sewer, portions of which remain functional after more than 2 millennia, features barrel-vaulted chambers constructed from carefully fitted tufa blocks that create waterproof passages capable of handling the drainage requirements of a major urban centre. The precision of the stonework and the sophisticated understanding of hydraulic principles evident in the system's design reflect the advanced engineering capabilities that Etruscan architects brought to infrastructure projects. Temple architecture developed distinctive characteristics that combined indigenous Italian traditions with adapted Greek elements to create a uniquely Etruscan building type that would profoundly influence Roman religious architecture. The typical Etruscan temple featured a high podium approached by a single flight of steps, creating an elevated platform that enhanced the building's visual prominence while providing protection from flooding and emphasizing the sacred character of the structure. The temple plan typically included a deep front porch supported by columns, with the cella divided into 3 chambers dedicated to different deities. The Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus on the Capitoline Hill in Rome, built according to Etruscan architectural principles during the late 6th century BC, established the canonical form for Roman temple design that would be replicated throughout the empire. The building featured the characteristic Etruscan proportions, with a nearly square plan, deep front portico, and triple cella arrangement that accommodated the Roman triad of Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva. The structural system employed wooden post and beam construction for the roof framework, with elaborate terracotta decorations protecting the wooden elements from weather while providing colourful ornamental programs. The decorative terracotta systems developed for Etruscan temples represented sophisticated integration of sculptural and architectural elements that created unified artistic programs celebrating religious themes while demonstrating the wealth and cultural sophistication of sponsoring communities. The antefixes that crown the edges of temple roofs featured palmette designs, mythological figures, and geometric patterns executed with precision that rivals contemporary Greek architectural sculpture. The ridgepole decorations included narrative sculptural groups that depicted mythological scenes visible from ground level, creating outdoor galleries that educated viewers while enhancing the visual impact of religious buildings. Urban planning principles developed by Etruscan architects influenced city design throughout central Italy and provided models that Roman planners would adapt for colonial foundations across the Mediterranean world. The city of Marzabotto, founded in the late 6th century BC according to systematic planning principles, features a regular grid of streets oriented according to religious requirements that divided the urban area into distinct functional zones. The main thoroughfares measure exactly 15 metres in width and feature raised sidewalks with integrated drainage systems that carried rainwater to collection points outside the city walls. The integration of religious and practical considerations in Etruscan urban planning created cities that functioned efficiently while maintaining proper relationships with divine forces that governed community welfare. The ritual requirements for city foundation included the ceremonial ploughing of boundaries, the establishment of sacred precincts at appropriate locations, and the orientation of major streets and buildings according to cosmic principles that ensured divine approval for the new settlement. These practices created urban environments that served both practical and spiritual needs while establishing precedents for Roman colonial planning. Hydraulic engineering achievements enabled Etruscan cities to expand into previously uninhabitable areas while supporting larger populations through sophisticated water management systems. The cuniculi drainage tunnels that surrounded major cities like Veii represent extraordinary engineering accomplishments that required precise surveying, coordinated labour organisation, and advanced understanding of hydraulic principles. These underground channels, carved through solid rock using only hand tools, extended for miles around individual cities while maintaining precise gradients that ensured proper water flow. The Ponte Sodo tunnel near Veii demonstrates the technical capabilities of Etruscan engineers who created a 70-metre passage through solid tufa rock to drain marshy areas that could then be converted to agricultural use. The tunnel features carefully calculated dimensions that maximise water flow while maintaining structural stability, with arch-shaped cross-sections that distribute loads efficiently through the surrounding rock. The precision of the surveying work required to align the tunnel properly across such distances indicates sophisticated mathematical knowledge and practical engineering experience. Technological innovations in metallurgy enabled Etruscan craftsmen to produce objects of extraordinary technical complexity and artistic sophistication that found markets throughout the Mediterranean world. The development of advanced smelting techniques allowed efficient extraction of metals from local ores, while innovations in alloy composition created bronzes with superior working properties for different applications. The granulation technique used for gold jewellery involved fusing tiny spherical gold particles to create decorative surfaces of remarkable delicacy, a process that required precise temperature control and timing that modern jewellers struggle to replicate. The production of high-quality steel for weapons and tools represented another significant technological achievement that gave Etruscan products competitive advantages in Mediterranean markets. Archaeological analysis of Etruscan iron objects reveals sophisticated understanding of carbon content control, quenching techniques, and tempering processes that created tools and weapons with superior performance characteristics. The export of Etruscan metalwork to Greek cities, Celtic territories, and other Mediterranean markets demonstrates the international recognition of Etruscan technical expertise. Pottery production evolved from earlier Villanovan traditions to incorporate new techniques and decorative styles that reflected increasing sophistication and international influences. The development of Bucero pottery, with its characteristic black surface achieved through controlled reduction firing, represented a uniquely Etruscan contribution to ceramic technology that influenced pottery production throughout central Italy. Master potters developed specialized techniques for creating the metallic sheen that distinguished the finest Bucero vessels, while decorative programs incorporated both traditional geometric patterns and narrative scenes adapted from Greek mythological sources. The red figure pottery produced in Etruscan workshops during the 4th and 3rd centuries BC adapted Greek painting techniques, while developing distinctive iconographic programs that reflected local cultural preferences. Etruscan red figure painters created narrative compositions featuring indigenous mythological figures alongside adapted Greek heroes, with particular attention to underworld scenes and funerary themes that reflected Etruscan religious beliefs about death and the afterlife. The technical quality of these works rivals contemporary Athenian productions, while maintaining distinctive stylistic characteristics that mark them as products of Etruscan workshops. The influence of Etruscan artistic and architectural achievements extended far beyond the boundaries of Etruria proper to shape cultural development throughout central Italy and beyond. Roman adoption of Etruscan building techniques, decorative programs and artistic styles created the foundation for imperial Roman art and architecture that would spread throughout Europe, North Africa, and the Near East. The realistic portrait tradition that emerged from Etruscan workshops provided models for Roman sculptors who developed these techniques into the distinctive imperial portrait styles that proclaimed Roman power and authority throughout the known world. The transformation of Etruscan civilization during the 6th century BC marked the apex of their political influence and territorial expansion, as the confederation of city-states projected power far beyond the traditional boundaries of Etruria proper, into regions that would reshape the demographic and cultural landscape of the Italian peninsula. This period witnessed unprecedented military campaigns that established Etruscan control over vast territories stretching from the Po Valley in the north to the fertile plains of Campania in the south, creating a network of settlements, trading posts, and allied communities that generated enormous wealth, while spreading Etruscan cultural influence across much of central and northern Italy. The northward expansion into the Po Valley represented one of the most significant demographic movements of the 6th century BC, as Etruscan colonists established a series of major settlements that would dominate the region for centuries. Felsina, the Etruscan name for modern Bologna, emerged as the principal centre of this northern expansion, its strategic position controlling the major passes through the Apennine Mountains while commanding the fertile agricultural lands of the Po River Valley. Archaeological excavations at the Certosa necropolis have revealed over 2,000 burials, dating from the 6th to 3rd centuries BC, their grave goods demonstrating the extraordinary wealth accumulated by Etruscan colonists through control of transalpine trade routes that connected the Mediterranean world with Celtic territories in Gaul and Central Europe. The scale of Etruscan settlement in the Po Valley extended far beyond simple trading posts or military outposts to encompass systematic colonization that transformed the regional economy and cultural landscape. Marzabotto, founded around 500 BC according to rigorous urban planning principles, features a grid system of streets oriented according to religious requirements, while incorporating sophisticated drainage systems and public buildings that replicated the urban amenities of major Etruscan cities in the homeland. The settlement's residential areas reveal substantial houses with private courtyards, hypercaust heating systems, and decorative programs that demonstrate the prosperity of colonists who exploited the agricultural potential of the Po Valley while maintaining commercial connections with Mediterranean markets. Svina emerged as the most important Etruscan port in the northern Adriatic, its position at the mouth of the Po River enabling control of trade routes that extended across the Adriatic Sea to Greek colonies and into the interior regions of Central Europe. The city's necropolis has yielded over 4,000 tombs, containing grave goods that reflect the cosmopolitan character of this commercial centre, including Athenian red figure pottery, Celtic metalwork, amber from the Baltic region, and locally produced luxury items that demonstrate the integration of diverse cultural traditions. The wealth accumulated through this trade enabled Spina's rulers to construct monumental buildings and sponsor artistic commissions that rivaled the achievements of the major Etruscan cities in the homeland. The establishment of Etruscan control over Alpine passes facilitated trade relationships with Celtic peoples that brought exotic goods and raw materials to Mediterranean markets while creating new outlets for Etruscan manufactured products. Archaeological evidence from sites like Hallstatt and Latene reveals extensive imports of Etruscan bronze vessels, pottery, and luxury items that were traded for amber, furs, slaves, and raw metals that Celtic communities extracted from alpine deposits. This transalpine commerce generated profits that funded the military campaigns and urban construction projects that characterized the height of Etruscan power, while creating cultural exchanges that influenced artistic and technological development on both sides of the Alps. The southward expansion into Campania brought Etruscan forces into direct competition with Greek colonists who had established major settlements along the southern Italian coast during the 8th and 7th centuries BC. The fertile volcanic soils around Mount Vesuvius and the strategic harbours of the Bay of Naples attracted both Greek and Etruscan colonization efforts, creating territorial conflicts that would define the political landscape of southern Italy for centuries. Etruscan forces succeeded in establishing control over inland areas of Campania, while founding the major settlement of Capua, which became the principal centre of Etruscan power in the region. Capua's strategic position in the Campanian plain enabled control of agricultural production that fed growing urban populations while generating surplus crops for export to other regions. The city's workshops produced distinctive pottery styles that combined Etruscan techniques with local traditions, creating hybrid cultural forms that reflected the complex demographic situation in colonized territories. Archaeological evidence from Capua's necropolis reveals burial practices that maintained Etruscan religious traditions while incorporating local elements, suggesting processes of cultural adaptation that enabled successful integration of colonist and indigenous populations. The Etruscan presence in Campania extended beyond territorial control to encompass cultural influence that transformed local communities throughout the region. Indigenous peoples adopted Etruscan urban planning principles, architectural techniques, and artistic styles, while maintaining their own languages and religious traditions. This cultural synthesis created distinctive regional variations of Etruscan civilization that enriched the broader cultural landscape while demonstrating the adaptability of Etruscan institutions to diverse local conditions. Naval supremacy in the Tyrrhenian Sea provided the foundation for Etruscan territorial expansion and commercial dominance during this period, as fleets based at major ports like Caere, Tarquinia, and Volchi controlled shipping routes that connected the Western Mediterranean with markets in Greece, the Near East, and North Africa. Etruscan warships, depicted in tomb paintings and described in literary sources, featured bronze rams designed for ramming enemy vessels while carrying contingents of marines equipped for boarding actions. The naval technology employed by Etruscan fleets incorporated innovations borrowed from Phoenician and Greek shipbuilding traditions, while developing distinctive characteristics that enhanced their effectiveness in Mediterranean warfare. The Battle of Alalia around 540 BC represented the climax of Etruscan naval power and demonstrated their ability to coordinate military operations with Carthaginian allies against Greek expansion in the Western Mediterranean. The conflict arose from Greek attempts to establish a permanent settlement on Corsica, which threatened Etruscan control of shipping routes between the Italian mainland and Sardinia, while providing Greeks with a base for further expansion into Etruscan territorial waters. The combined Etruscan-Carthaginian fleet that engaged the Greek forces near Alalia numbered approximately 120 ships, indicating the scale of naval resources that Etruscan cities could deploy for major military operations. The battle itself involved complex tactical maneuvers, as the opposing fleets sought advantageous positions for ramming attacks while avoiding encirclement by enemy forces. Etruscan ships employed tactics that emphasized coordinated attacks by multiple vessels against isolated enemy units, their bronze rams capable of punching through enemy hulls below the waterline to cause rapid sinking. The Greek forces, commanded by experienced naval commanders from Phocia, attempted to use their superior seamanship to outmaneuver the larger Etruscan Carthaginian fleet, while concentrating their attacks against individual enemy squadrons. Although the Greeks technically won the battle by maintaining control of the battlefield, the losses were so severe that they abandoned their colonization efforts on Corsica and withdrew to Massalia and other established settlements. The Etruscan and Carthaginian fleets, despite suffering significant casualties, achieved their strategic objective of preventing Greek territorial expansion while maintaining control of crucial shipping routes. The aftermath of Alalia saw increased cooperation between Etruscan and Carthaginian naval forces that would continue for decades, creating a Western Mediterranean alliance that balanced Greek expansion while protecting the commercial interests of both partners. The political influence that Etruscan cities exercised over early Rome during this period fundamentally shaped the development of Roman institutions, urban planning, and cultural traditions in ways that would persist throughout Roman history. The traditional Roman accounts of Etruscan kings ruling Rome during the 6th century BC, while historically problematic in their details, reflect the reality of extensive Etruscan involvement in Roman political development during the crucial formative period when Rome transformed from a collection of hilltop villages into a unified urban centre, capable of competing with other major powers in central Italy. The Tarquin dynasty, according to Roman historical tradition, represented the culmination of Etruscan political influence in Roman affairs, with rulers who implemented major construction projects, military reforms, and institutional changes that established the foundations for later Roman expansion. Tarquinius Priscus allegedly initiated the construction of the Circus Maximus, the Cloaca Maxima drainage system, and the Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus on the Capitoline Hill, projects that required sophisticated engineering expertise and organisational capabilities that reflected Etruscan technical knowledge and administrative experience. Archaeological evidence supports the essential accuracy of these traditional accounts, with excavations in Rome revealing extensive construction activities during the late 6th century BC that employed characteristically Etruscan architectural techniques and decorative programs. The Forum Romanum was systematically paved and provided with drainage systems that transformed the marshy valley into a suitable location for public buildings and commercial activities. The construction techniques employed in these projects, including the use of tufa blocks fitted without mortar and the implementation of sophisticated drainage systems, reflect Etruscan engineering expertise that was unavailable elsewhere in central Italy during this period. The religious and ceremonial aspects of Roman kingship during this period incorporated distinctively Etruscan elements that would influence Roman political traditions for centuries. The regalia associated with Roman magistrates, including the toga praetexta with its purple border, the curule chair, and the fasces carried by lictors, derived from Etruscan symbols of political authority that connected secular power with religious sanction. The triumph ceremony, which became one of the most distinctive Roman political rituals, incorporated Etruscan elements including the painted face of the triumphant general, the elaborate chariot procession, and the religious ceremonies that preceded and followed the public celebration. The economic prosperity that sustained Etruscan expansion and political influence during this period rested on diversified production systems that exploited the natural resources of central Italy, while maintaining extensive commercial networks throughout the Mediterranean world. The control of mineral resources in the Colline Metallifere and other mining regions provided raw materials for metalworking industries that produced both utilitarian objects and luxury items for local use and export markets. The iron mines on the island of Elba, controlled by Populonia, supplied ore for smelting operations that produced finished metal products ranging from agricultural tools and weapons to elaborate decorative objects that found markets throughout the Mediterranean region. The scale of mining operations during this period required substantial labour forces, sophisticated extraction techniques, and efficient transportation systems that connected mining sites with processing facilities and export ports. Archaeological surveys on Elba have identified numerous mining shafts, ore processing areas, and workers' settlements that demonstrate the industrial character of Etruscan mineral extraction. The environmental impact of these operations was substantial, with slag heaps and deforested areas indicating the intensity of production activities that generated the raw materials necessary for Etruscan economic expansion. Agricultural production provided the foundation for population growth and urbanization through intensive cultivation techniques that maximized yields from available farmland while generating surpluses for trade and urban consumption. The systematic drainage of marshy areas around major cities created additional agricultural land while reducing disease vectors that threatened urban populations. Terracing of hillsides expanded cultivation into previously marginal areas while preventing soil erosion that could damage downstream agricultural areas and urban settlements. The cultivation of grapes for wine production became particularly important during this period, as Etruscan wines gained recognition throughout the Mediterranean world for their quality and distinctive characteristics. Archaeological evidence from rural sites reveals extensive vineyard installations including pressing facilities, storage areas, and transportation infrastructure that supported commercial wine production on a scale that far exceeded local consumption requirements. The export of Etruscan wine to Greek cities, Celtic territories, and other Mediterranean markets generated profits that funded military campaigns, urban construction projects, and artistic commissions that proclaimed Etruscan cultural achievements. Olive cultivation expanded significantly during this period, with systematic planting of olive groves that provided oil for local consumption, industrial uses, and export markets. The processing of olives required specialized facilities including pressing equipment, storage containers, and transportation systems that connected rural production areas with urban markets and export ports. The quality of Etruscan olive oil earned recognition throughout the Mediterranean region, with exports reaching markets in Greece, North Africa, and Gaul that valued the distinctive flavour and superior quality of Italian production. The commercial networks that connected Etruscan cities with markets throughout the Mediterranean world facilitated exchanges of goods, technologies, and cultural influences that enriched Etruscan civilization while generating the wealth necessary for territorial expansion and political influence. Etruscan merchants established trading posts at strategic locations throughout the Mediterranean, while foreign traders brought exotic goods and new ideas to Etruscan ports. The port facilities at Pergae serving Caere included extensive warehouses, ship repair facilities, and residential quarters for foreign merchants who conducted business in Etruscan territory on a permanent or seasonal basis. The diversity of imported goods found in Etruscan archaeological contexts demonstrates the extensive reach of these commercial networks and the sophisticated tastes of Etruscan consumers who valued exotic materials and foreign craftsmanship. Greek pottery, particularly fine-painted vessels from Athenian workshops, appears in large quantities at Etruscan sites, indicating sustained demand for Greek artistic products. Egyptian scarabs, Phoenician silver vessels, Celtic metalwork, and amber from the Baltic region reflect trade relationships that extended across vast distances while generating profits for Etruscan merchants who served as intermediaries between different regional markets. The technological innovations that emerged from Etruscan workshops during this period enhanced their competitive position in Mediterranean markets, while demonstrating the sophisticated technical capabilities of Etruscan craftsmen. Advanced metallurgical techniques enabled production of high-quality bronze alloys with superior working properties for different applications, while innovations in ceramic technology created pottery with distinctive characteristics that found ready markets throughout the Mediterranean region. The granulation technique used for gold jewellery required precise temperature control and timing that created decorative effects of extraordinary delicacy and beauty. The zenith of Etruscan territorial expansion and naval supremacy began to face serious challenges as the 5th century BC progressed, with mounting pressure from resurgent Greek forces in southern Italy and the increasingly aggressive expansion of Roman power in Latium. The delicate balance of power that had enabled Etruscan dominance across central Italy for over a century started to shift dramatically when Greek naval forces, supported by the tyrant Hiero I of Syracuse, decisively defeated the Etruscan fleet at Cumae in 474 BC. This naval disaster marked the beginning of a gradual but irreversible decline in Etruscan influence that would culminate in the loss of their southern territories and the eventual subjugation of their heartland cities to Roman control. The Battle of Cumae represented far more than a single military defeat. It shattered the naval supremacy that had enabled Etruscan cities to project power across the Tyrrhenian Sea while protecting the commercial networks that generated much of their wealth. The Etruscan fleet that approached Cumae in 474 BC consisted of approximately 80 warships drawn from multiple cities, their bronze-reinforced hulls and trained crews representing decades of naval development and combat experience. The ships themselves featured the characteristic Mediterranean design of the period, with bronze rams projecting from reinforced prows designed to punch through enemy hulls below the waterline, or contingents of marines equipped with spears, shields, and javelins prepared for boarding actions against disabled enemy vessels. Hiero's Greek fleet, numbering roughly 70 ships but benefiting from superior tactical coordination and more experienced commanders, employed innovative battle formations that exploited weaknesses in traditional Etruscan naval tactics. The Greek ships, many of them triremes with 3 banks of oars providing exceptional speed and maneuverability, could outmaneuver the heavier Etruscan vessels while concentrating their attacks against isolated enemy units. The battle began at dawn with both fleets forming parallel lines approximately 500 meters apart, their commanders shouting orders while bronze trumpets signalled tactical movements to individual ship captains. The initial engagement saw Etruscan ships attempting their traditional ramming attacks against the Greek line, their heavier construction providing advantages in direct collisions, while their marines prepared to board damaged enemy vessels. However, the Greek commanders had anticipated these tactics and ordered their ships to avoid direct confrontations, while using their superior speed to attack Etruscan vessels from unexpected angles. The result was a series of running battles across several square kilometers of open water, with individual ship duels determining the fate of hundreds of sailors and marines, while the overall tactical situation gradually shifted in favor of the more disciplined Greek forces. By midday, the Etruscan fleet had lost nearly half its ships to ramming attacks, boarding actions, and the devastating effects of Greek fire arrows that ignited the wooden superstructures of enemy vessels. The survivors, their formations broken, and their commanders either dead or struggling to maintain control over demoralized crews, began a fighting retreat toward the Etruscan-controlled ports along the Italian coast. The Greek pursuit continued for several hours, with individual Etruscan ships falling victim to coordinated attacks by multiple enemy vessels, while others managed to escape under cover of approaching darkness. The strategic consequences of this defeat extended far beyond the immediate loss of ships and trained personnel to encompass the collapse of Etruscan control over crucial sea routes that sustained their commercial empire. Greek forces quickly moved to exploit their victory by establishing naval bases at strategic points along the Italian coast, effectively cutting Etruscan cities off from their colonies in Corsica and Sardinia, while threatening the shipping routes that connected northern Italian ports with markets in North Africa and the eastern Mediterranean. The economic impact was immediate and severe, as Etruscan merchants found themselves unable to compete with Greek traders who now enjoyed naval protection for their commercial activities. The loss of naval supremacy also exposed Etruscan territories in Campania to direct Greek attack, as forces from Syracuse and other Greek cities launched coordinated campaigns designed to drive Etruscan settlers from the fertile plains around Mount Vesuvius. The city of Capua, which had served as the principal centre of Etruscan power in the region, found itself increasingly isolated as Greek forces captured or destroyed the smaller settlements that had supported Etruscan control over the Campanian countryside. Archaeological evidence from sites like Ponte Cagnano reveals destruction layers dating to this period, with burned buildings and scattered weapons indicating the violent nature of these territorial conflicts. The pressure on Etruscan positions in Campania intensified as indigenous Samnite tribes, encouraged by Greek victories and seeking to reclaim territories lost during the period of Etruscan expansion, launched their own attacks against Etruscan settlements and allied communities. The Samnites, organised into warrior bands that could move rapidly through the mountainous terrain of central and southern Italy, proved particularly effective at disrupting Etruscan supply lines and isolating individual settlements from mutual support. Their intimate knowledge of local geography enabled them to avoid direct confrontations with Etruscan heavy infantry, while launching devastating raids against agricultural areas and commercial facilities that sustained Etruscan urban centres. The combined pressure from Greek naval forces and Samnite land attacks created an impossible strategic situation for Etruscan commanders in Campania, who lacked the resources to defend extensive territories against multiple enemies while maintaining the garrison forces necessary to control potentially hostile local populations. The gradual abandonment of outlying settlements began during the 460 SBC, as Etruscan families and their retainers retreated toward more defensible positions, while local populations either fled the region entirely or submitted to new Greek or Samnite rulers who promised protection in exchange for political loyalty. Simultaneously with these southern disasters, Etruscan cities faced mounting pressure from Roman expansion in Latium, as the growing power of Rome began to threaten traditional Etruscan influence over the Tiber Valley and its crucial trade routes. The expulsion of the Tarquin dynasty from Rome, traditionally dated to 509 BC but more likely occurring during the late 5th century, marked the beginning of sustained Roman hostility toward Etruscan political influence, while creating opportunities for Roman territorial expansion at Etruscan expense. The establishment of the Roman Republic, with its aggressive expansionist policies and military innovations that enhanced the effectiveness of citizen soldiers, posed unprecedented challenges to Etruscan cities that had grown accustomed to dealing with smaller, less organised Latin communities. The city of Veii, positioned just 12 miles north of Rome and controlling the crucial ford across the Tiber River, became the focal point of Roman-Etruscan conflict, as both sides recognised the strategic importance of this position for controlling trade and military movements in central Italy. Veii's location on a naturally defensible plateau, surrounded by steep cliffs and the Cremera River, provided excellent defensive advantages, while its extensive agricultural territories and control over salt production facilities generated the economic resources necessary to sustain prolonged military campaigns. The city's population, estimated at around 25,000 inhabitants during this period, made it one of the largest urban centres in central Italy and a formidable opponent for the expanding Roman state. The initial phases of Roman Veientine warfare during the 480s and 470s BC consisted primarily of seasonal campaigns that followed traditional patterns of Mediterranean conflict, with armies meeting in open battle during the summer months before, withdrawing to winter quarters when weather conditions made large-scale military operations impractical. These early conflicts typically involved forces numbering several thousand soldiers on each side, their equipment and tactics reflecting the military traditions of central Italian warfare that emphasized heavy infantry combat, supported by cavalry units drawn from aristocratic families. Roman military organization during this period underwent significant innovations that enhanced their effectiveness against Etruscan opponents who relied on traditional military structures based on aristocratic leadership and seasonal levies. The development of the manipular system, which organized Roman forces into smaller, more flexible tactical units that could adapt to different battlefield conditions, provided advantages over the more rigid phalanx formations favoured by Etruscan armies. The Roman emphasis on discipline, standardized equipment, and systematic training created professional military capabilities that gradually overcame the individual heroism and superior equipment that had traditionally given Etruscan warriors advantages in combat. The siege of Veii, which began in earnest around 405 BC under the command of Marcus Furius Camillus, represented a revolutionary development in Roman military capabilities and strategic thinking. Unlike previous conflicts that had followed seasonal patterns, the Romans established permanent siege works around Veii and maintained continuous pressure on the city throughout multiple years of operations. This approach required unprecedented organisational efforts to supply and maintain an army in the field for extended periods, while constructing the engineering works necessary to breach or circumvent Veii formidable defensive systems. Camillus himself emerged as one of the most capable Roman commanders of this period, his strategic vision and tactical innovations enabling Roman forces to overcome obstacles that had previously made Etruscan cities virtually impregnable to external attack. His background as a member of the Roman patrician class provided him with the political connections necessary to secure sustained support for the lengthy siege operations, while his military experience in previous campaigns against Latin and Sabine enemies had demonstrated his ability to coordinate complex operations involving multiple legions and allied contingents. The siege works constructed around Veii represented engineering achievements that rivaled contemporary Greek and Persian military projects, with Roman engineers creating a continuous line of fortifications that completely encircled the city while preventing relief forces from breaking the blockade. The construction of these works required moving thousands of tons of earth and stone, with Roman soldiers working in shifts to excavate ditches, build ramparts, and construct the wooden palisades that protected their positions from Etruscan counterattacks. The scale of these operations necessitated the development of new logistical systems to supply tools, materials, and provisions to work crews operating at considerable distances from Roman supply bases. The famous tunnel that Roman engineers excavated beneath Veii's citadel demonstrated the sophisticated technical capabilities that Roman military engineering had achieved by the early 4th century BC. This underground passage, extending for several hundred metres through solid tufa rock, required precise surveying to ensure proper alignment while maintaining structural integrity under the weight of overlying buildings and fortifications. The excavation work proceeded slowly and quietly to avoid detection by Etruscan defenders, with Roman miners working in small teams that removed debris through carefully concealed entrances while maintaining ventilation systems that prevented asphyxiation in the confined underground spaces. The psychological impact of the prolonged siege on both Roman and Etruscan populations extended far beyond the immediate military situation to influence political developments throughout central Italy. For the Romans, the siege represented a test of their expanding power and military capabilities, with success promising to establish their dominance over central Italian affairs, while failure might encourage other enemies to challenge Roman territorial ambitions. The financial costs of maintaining an army in the field for multiple years strained Roman resources and required new taxation systems that distributed the burden of military operations across the entire citizen population rather than relying solely on the contributions of wealthy families. For the Etruscans, the siege of Veii exposed fundamental weaknesses in their political system that prevented effective coordination between different cities even when facing existential threats to their collective survival. The failure of other major Etruscan cities to provide meaningful assistance to Veii during the siege reflected the competitive relationships and mutual suspicions that characterized the Etruscan Confederation, with individual cities prioritizing their own immediate interests over the broader strategic requirements of collective defense against Roman expansion. This political fragmentation would prove to be one of the most significant factors in the eventual Roman conquest of Etruria, as Roman forces could concentrate their efforts against individual cities while their enemies remained unable to coordinate effective resistance. The internal political instability that plagued Etruscan cities during this period reflected broader social and economic changes that undermined traditional sources of authority and legitimacy. The Lecumenate system, which had provided effective leadership during the period of Etruscan expansion and prosperity, proved inadequate for managing the complex challenges posed by military defeats, economic disruption, and social unrest that accompanied the loss of territorial control and commercial supremacy. The hereditary aristocratic families that had dominated Etruscan politics for centuries found their authority challenged by emerging social groups that blamed traditional leaders for the military disasters and economic hardships that afflicted their communities. Archaeological evidence from major Etruscan cities reveals declining investment in public buildings and infrastructure projects during this period, suggesting that the economic resources necessary for maintaining urban amenities and defensive systems were no longer available to city governments. The reduction in the scale and quality of tomb construction, particularly evident at sites like Tarquinia and Cerveteri, indicates that even wealthy families experienced significant reductions in their economic circumstances as traditional sources of income from trade and territorial control disappeared. The artistic production that had flourished during the 6th and early 5th centuries BC shows clear signs of decline, with workshops producing fewer luxury items and artistic commissions reflecting more modest resources and less sophisticated techniques. The weakening of traditional religious authority accompanied these political and economic changes, as the elaborate theological systems that had legitimized Etruscan political institutions lost credibility in the face of military defeats and territorial losses that seemed to contradict divine promises of continued prosperity and expansion. The haruspices and other religious specialists who had provided guidance for political and military decisions found their interpretations questioned by populations that had witnessed the failure of traditional divination practices to predict or prevent the disasters that befell their communities. This religious crisis contributed to the broader breakdown of social cohesion that made effective resistance to Roman expansion increasingly difficult to organize and maintain. The loss of territorial control in the Po Valley represented another significant blow to Etruscan power and prestige, as Celtic tribes moving southward across the Alps began to pressure Etruscan settlements that had prospered for over a century through control of transalpine trade routes. The city of Felsina, which had served as the principal centre of Etruscan power in the region, found itself increasingly isolated as Celtic warbands disrupted communications with the homeland while threatening the agricultural areas that sustained urban populations. The gradual abandonment of smaller Etruscan settlements in the Po Valley during the late 5th and early 4th centuries BC reflected the inability of colonial authorities to maintain control over extensive territories when faced with determined opposition from indigenous populations supported by external allies. The Celtic pressure on Etruscan positions in northern Italy created strategic problems that compounded the difficulties posed by Roman expansion in the south. As Etruscan military resources became stretched across multiple fronts, while their enemies could concentrate their efforts against isolated targets. The traditional Etruscan strategy of maintaining control through networks of allied communities and client relationships proved inadequate when faced with enemies who rejected diplomatic solutions and sought complete territorial control, rather than accommodation within existing political structures. The inability to adapt their political and military systems to these new challenges would prove to be one of the decisive factors in the eventual collapse of Etruscan independence and the incorporation of their territories into the expanding Roman state. The fall of Veii in 396 BC, after its grueling 10-year siege, marked a watershed moment that fundamentally altered the balance of power in central Italy, transforming Rome from a regional competitor into the dominant force capable of systematic conquest across Etruscan territories. Marcus Furius Camillus emerged from the tunnels beneath Veii's citadel at dawn on that decisive day, his soldiers following through the carefully excavated passage that had taken Roman engineers 3 years to complete. The defenders, caught completely off guard by this underground assault while simultaneously facing renewed attacks against their walls, found themselves fighting on multiple fronts as Roman forces poured through breached gates and scaled previously impregnable ramparts. The sack of Veii provided Romans with unprecedented wealth that funded future military campaigns, while demonstrating the effectiveness of prolonged siege warfare against fortified Etruscan cities. The captured treasures included thousands of bronze vessels, elaborate jewellery, religious artefacts, and the famous terracotta statuary that had adorned the city's temples for generations. Roman soldiers systematically looted private houses, workshops, and public buildings, carrying away everything of value while reducing much of the city to rubble through deliberate destruction designed to prevent future resistance. The population faced enslavement or exile, with only those who had actively supported Roman interests during the siege receiving any consideration for clemency. The psychological impact of Veii's destruction reverberated throughout Etruria as other cities recognized that traditional defensive strategies could no longer guarantee protection against Roman military capabilities. The sight of smoke rising from the burning city, visible for miles across the Tiber Valley, served as a stark reminder that Roman power had evolved beyond seasonal raiding into systematic conquest aimed at permanent territorial control. Etruscan leaders who had previously dismissed Roman threats as manageable local conflicts now faced the reality that their northern neighbour possessed both the military capabilities and political determination to destroy cities that had dominated central Italian affairs for centuries. Roman expansion following the Veii campaign adopted increasingly sophisticated strategies that combined military pressure with diplomatic initiatives designed to isolate individual Etruscan cities while preventing coordinated resistance. Rather than attempting simultaneous attacks against multiple targets, Roman commanders focused their efforts on single objectives while using treaties, alliances, and economic incentives to neutralize potential allies of their primary enemy. This approach exploited the fundamental weakness of the Etruscan political system, which relied on voluntary cooperation between independent cities rather than centralized authority capable of coordinating collective defense against external threats. The conquest of Falerii in 394 BC demonstrated Roman mastery of these combined military and diplomatic techniques, as Camillus surrounded the city with siege works while simultaneously negotiating with Faliscan leaders who recognized the futility of prolonged resistance. The siege lasted only 8 months before the city surrendered, its population accepting Roman terms that included tribute payments, territorial concessions, and agreements to provide military assistance for future Roman campaigns. Unlike Veii, Falerii survived as a functioning community under Roman supervision, its experience establishing precedents for the integration policies that would characterize Roman expansion throughout Etruria. The Roman approach to conquered territories evolved rapidly during this period, as administrators developed systems for incorporating diverse populations while maintaining security and extracting resources necessary for continued military operations. The establishment of Roman colonies at strategic locations provided permanent garrisons that could respond quickly to local uprisings while serving as centres for Roman cultural influence that gradually transformed regional customs and institutions. Sutrium and Nepet, founded as Roman strongholds controlling routes into southern Etruria, featured carefully planned urban layouts with forums, temples, and public buildings that proclaimed Roman authority while providing amenities that encouraged local cooperation. The granting of various forms of citizenship represented another crucial element of Roman integration policy, creating incentives for collaboration while establishing legal frameworks that protected individual rights under Roman law. The civitas sine suffragio granted to certain Etruscan communities provided legal protections and commercial privileges without full political participation, creating intermediate status that acknowledged Roman supremacy while maintaining local autonomy in domestic affairs. This flexible approach to citizenship enabled Romans to adapt their policies to local conditions, while gradually assimilating conquered populations into expanding Roman institutions. Roman military innovations during this period enhanced their effectiveness against Etruscan defensive systems, while reducing the costs and duration of siege operations that had previously required enormous resources and extended commitments. The development of improved siege engines, including torsion catapults capable of breaching stone walls, and mobile towers that enabled attackers to overcome height advantages enjoyed by defenders, revolutionized assault techniques while reducing Roman casualties during urban warfare. The standardization of equipment and tactics across multiple legions created military capabilities that could be deployed rapidly against different targets while maintaining consistent effectiveness regardless of local conditions. The professional training that Roman soldiers received in engineering, construction, and siege warfare transformed military campaigns from seasonal expeditions into systematic operations capable of overcoming any defensive obstacle through sustained effort and technical expertise. Roman legionaries learned to construct roads, bridges, and fortifications with precision that rivaled specialized craftsmen, their military service providing practical experience in skills that proved valuable in civilian occupations after completion of their military obligations. This integration of military and civilian capabilities created a citizen-soldier system that could mobilize enormous resources for extended campaigns while maintaining economic productivity in conquered territories. The resistance movements that emerged in response to Roman expansion reflected the desperation of Etruscan communities facing the destruction of their traditional way of life, but their fragmented nature and limited coordination prevented effective opposition to Roman military superiority. The revolt of Tarquinia in 386 BC began with the massacre of Roman prisoners captured during previous campaigns, an act of defiance that prompted immediate Roman retaliation under Camillus, who had emerged from temporary exile to resume command of Roman forces. The siege of Tarquinia lasted 6 months before the city capitulated, its population accepting harsh terms that included massive indemnity payments and the execution of leaders responsible for the prisoner massacre. The involvement of Etruscan cities in broader Italian coalitions against Rome represented desperate attempts to create military capabilities sufficient to challenge Roman expansion. But these alliances typically collapsed under pressure due to conflicting interests and mutual suspicions among participants. The Gallic invasion of 387 BC provided temporary relief for Etruscan cities as Roman attention focused on defending their own territory against Celtic warbands that had crossed the Apennines and threatened central Italian settlements. However, the rapid Roman recovery from this disaster and their subsequent campaigns against both Gallic and Etruscan enemies demonstrated the resilience of Roman institutions and their ability to adapt to multiple simultaneous threats. The systematic conquest of southern Etruscan cities during the 350s and 340s BC eliminated the last major centres of independent Etruscan power, while establishing Roman control over territories that had resisted incorporation for decades. Caere, which had maintained nominal independence through treaty relationships and tribute payments, finally submitted to direct Roman administration in 353 BC after internal political conflicts weakened resistance to external pressure. The city's strategic position controlling coastal trade routes made its incorporation essential for Roman commercial interests, while its wealthy population provided resources that funded continued military expansion. Tarquinia's final subjugation in 351 BC marked the end of organised Etruscan resistance in the southern regions, as Roman forces systematically destroyed the military capabilities of the last major independent city, while incorporating its territories into the expanding Roman state. The siege involved extensive use of Roman engineering capabilities, with multiple siege lines, underground tunnels, and specialised assault equipment that overcame defensive systems that protected the city for generations. The surrender terms included the dismantling of fortifications, the payment of enormous indemnities, and the provision of hostages from leading families to guarantee future compliance with Roman demands. The conquest of Volci in 280 BC represented the culmination of Roman expansion into central Etruria, as the city's resistance had continued longer than any other major Etruscan centre through its control of inland trade routes and mineral resources that generated wealth necessary for sustained military operations. The final siege required 2 full legions and lasted over a year, with Roman engineers constructing elaborate works that included multiple lines of circumvallation, siege towers, and mining operations that gradually undermined the city's defensive capabilities. The fall of Volci eliminated the last significant source of organised resistance to Roman authority, while providing access to mineral resources that enhanced Roman military capabilities. The gradual transformation of conquered Etruscan territories through Roman colonisation, road construction, and administrative reorganisation created permanent changes that integrated these regions into the expanding Roman state while preserving selected elements of Etruscan culture that proved compatible with Roman institutions. The construction of major roads like the Via Aurelia and Via Cassia connected former Etruscan cities with Roman administrative centres, while facilitating military movements and commercial activities that bound these regions economically to Roman markets. These engineering projects required enormous labour forces drawn from both Roman citizens and conquered populations, their construction providing employment while creating infrastructure that served Roman strategic interests. The adoption of Etruscan religious practices, architectural techniques, and artistic traditions by Roman authorities demonstrated the selective preservation of cultural elements that enhanced Roman capabilities while eliminating those that threatened political control. Roman temples constructed in former Etruscan territories incorporated traditional Etruscan architectural features, including elevated podia, deep front porches, and elaborate terracotta decorations that maintained visual continuity with local traditions while proclaiming Roman authority through their dedication to Roman deities. The continued employment of Etruscan haruspices by Roman officials throughout this period reflected practical recognition of their expertise in divination, while ensuring their loyalty through incorporation into Roman religious hierarchies. The economic integration of conquered Etruscan territories into Roman commercial networks generated prosperity that encouraged cooperation while providing resources for continued military expansion. Roman merchants established trading relationships with former Etruscan commercial partners throughout the Mediterranean, their activities protected by Roman naval power while benefiting from established trade routes and commercial practices developed over centuries of Etruscan mercantile activity. The continuity of commercial relationships eased the transition from Etruscan to Roman control while generating tax revenues that funded administrative costs and military operations. The survival of Etruscan cultural institutions under Roman rule depended largely on their compatibility with Roman political requirements and their utility for Roman administrative purposes. Etruscan families that demonstrated loyalty to Roman authority often retained significant local influence while adapting their traditional roles to serve Roman interests, rather than independent Etruscan political objectives. The preservation of Etruscan language and customs in rural areas continued for centuries after political conquest, creating cultural diversity within Roman territories that enriched Roman civilization while posing minimal threats to political stability. The establishment of Roman municipal governments in former Etruscan cities created new political institutions that combined Roman administrative practices with local traditions in ways that maintained order while encouraging participation by conquered populations. Local magistrates elected according to Roman procedures administered justice, collected taxes, and maintained public order while reporting to Roman provincial governors who retained ultimate authority over major policy decisions. This system enabled efficient administration of diverse territories while providing opportunities for advancement that encouraged collaboration with Roman authorities. The transformation of Etruscan military capabilities from independent forces capable of challenging Roman expansion into auxiliary units serving Roman strategic objectives represented one of the most significant changes accompanying conquest. Former Etruscan warriors who had defended their cities against Roman attacks now served in Roman armies as specialized troops whose knowledge of local terrain and military traditions enhanced Roman effectiveness in campaigns against other Italian peoples. The integration of these forces required careful attention to loyalty and motivation, with Roman commanders offering rewards, advancement opportunities, and retirement benefits that create incentives for faithful service while minimizing risks of rebellion or desertion. The final subjugation of independent Etruscan political entities by 264 BC initiated a complex process of cultural transformation that would fundamentally reshape Etruscan society over the subsequent 2.5 centuries. Unlike the violent conquest period that had preceded it, this era witnessed the gradual integration of Etruscan territories and populations into the Roman state system through sophisticated administrative mechanisms that preserved useful elements of Etruscan culture while systematically replacing independent political institutions with Roman governmental structures. The process unfolded unevenly across different regions and social classes, with aristocratic families often adapting more rapidly to Roman expectations, while rural populations maintained traditional practices for generations after formal political incorporation. The granting of Roman citizenship to Etruscan elites represented the most significant mechanism for political integration, creating powerful incentives for collaboration while establishing legal frameworks that protected property rights and commercial interests under Roman law. The Lex Julia de Civitate of 90 BC extended full citizenship rights to all Italian allies, including the remaining autonomous Etruscan communities, but this formal recognition culminated decades of gradual integration that had already transformed the political landscape of central Italy. Wealthy Etruscan families had begun seeking Roman citizenship much earlier, recognizing that political participation in Roman institutions offered opportunities for advancement that independent Etruscan cities could no longer provide. The career of Aulus Caecina Severus exemplified the successful adaptation of Etruscan aristocratic families to Roman political expectations during the late Republican period. Born into a prominent Villanovan family around 75 BC, Caecina received a Roman education in rhetoric and law before pursuing a senatorial career that took him to the highest levels of Roman government. His consulship in 1 AD demonstrated that former Etruscan elites could achieve the most prestigious positions in Roman society, while maintaining connections to their ancestral territories and cultural traditions. Caecina's extensive correspondence with Cicero reveals the complex negotiations required to balance Roman political obligations with local Etruscan interests, particularly regarding property disputes and municipal governance issues that affected his constituents in Volaterrae. The integration process required Etruscan aristocrats to master Latin language and Roman legal procedures while adapting their traditional roles as community leaders to serve Roman administrative purposes rather than independent political objectives. The cursus honorum provided a structured pathway for advancement that enabled capable individuals to progress from local magistracies to provincial governorships and senatorial positions. But success required demonstrated loyalty to Roman interests and competence in Roman institutional practices. Etruscan families that failed to make this transition often found themselves marginalized from political influence while their economic positions deteriorated due to competition from Roman colonists and merchants who enjoyed preferential treatment under Roman law. The transformation of Etruscan urban centres into Roman municipia created new governmental structures that combined Roman administrative practices with local traditions in ways that maintained order while encouraging participation by conquered populations. The municipal charters granted to cities like Volaterrae, Arretium, and Cortona specified the powers and responsibilities of local magistrates elected according to Roman procedures their authority extending to judicial decisions, tax collection, and public works projects that served both local needs and broader Roman strategic interests. These positions offered former Etruscan elites opportunities to maintain social prominence while serving Roman administrative requirements, creating collaborative relationships that facilitated peaceful integration. The Duumviri, who headed municipal governments in former Etruscan cities, exercised executive authority comparable to Roman consuls, but limited to local affairs, their election campaigns requiring the same rhetorical skills and political networking that characterized Roman politics at all levels. The aediles responsible for public buildings, markets, and festivals adapted traditional Etruscan civic responsibilities to Roman expectations, organizing games and ceremonies that honored Roman deities while maintaining elements of local religious traditions that posed no threat to Roman authority. The quaestors who managed municipal finances required expertise in Roman accounting practices and tax law, their positions often serving as stepping stones to higher offices in Roman provincial administration. The judicial system established in Etruscan municipalities integrated Roman legal principles with local customs in ways that protected Roman citizens while providing acceptable dispute resolution mechanisms for non-citizen populations. The praefecti iurisdicundo, appointed by Roman magistrates to oversee legal proceedings in smaller communities, often came from local Etruscan families who possessed both legal training and intimate knowledge of regional customs and relationships. Their decisions required conformity with Roman legal principles while considering local circumstances that Roman officials might not fully understand, creating hybrid legal systems that facilitated gradual cultural assimilation while maintaining social stability. The linguistic transformation that accompanied political integration represented perhaps the most profound change in daily life for Etruscan populations, as Latin gradually replaced Etruscan in official contexts before eventually displacing it entirely from common usage. The process began with administrative requirements that mandated Latin for legal documents, tax records, and official correspondence, creating practical incentives for literacy in the conqueror's language while preserving Etruscan for domestic and religious purposes. Bilingual inscriptions from the 2nd and 1st centuries BC document this transitional period, with public monuments featuring parallel texts that enabled Etruscan speakers to understand Roman governmental announcements while demonstrating official respect for local linguistic traditions. Educational institutions established in former Etruscan cities prioritized Latin instruction while incorporating elements of traditional Etruscan learning that enhanced students' cultural sophistication and practical capabilities. The rhetorical schools that prepared young aristocrats for political careers emphasized Latin oratory and Roman legal principles, while acknowledging the value of Etruscan religious knowledge and artistic traditions that could enhance their graduates' reputations for cultural refinement. The grammatical schools that provided basic education to broader populations focused primarily on Latin literacy and numeracy, but teachers often came from local families who maintained familiarity with Etruscan traditions that enriched their instructional methods. The decline of Etruscan language usage accelerated during the 1st century BC as practical advantages of Latin fluency became increasingly apparent to ambitious individuals seeking advancement in Roman society. Legal proceedings conducted entirely in Latin required professional interpreters for Etruscan speakers, creating additional costs and delays that encouraged direct acquisition of Latin language skills. Commercial transactions with Roman merchants and provincial administrators proceeded more efficiently when conducted in Latin, providing economic incentives for language acquisition that affected entire communities dependent on trade and manufacturing for their prosperity. The preservation of Etruscan in religious contexts continued longer than in secular affairs, as traditional ceremonies and priestly functions maintained ancient linguistic formulas that retained sacred significance even as their practical utility diminished. The haruspices, who continued to serve Roman officials throughout the Republican and Imperial periods, conducted their divination practices using traditional Etruscan terminology, their expertise requiring mastery of specialized vocabulary that had no Latin equivalents. The funeral inscriptions carved on family tombs often retained Etruscan elements, even when the deceased had lived primarily within Roman cultural contexts, reflecting the emotional connections that bound individuals to ancestral traditions despite practical adaptation to Roman social expectations. Rural populations maintained Etruscan linguistic traditions longer than urban elites, their agricultural occupations requiring less interaction with Roman administrative systems, while their geographic isolation from major transportation routes limited exposure to Latin-speaking populations. Archaeological evidence from rural sites reveals Etruscan inscriptions continuing into the 1st century AD, particularly on religious dedications and funerary monuments that served community functions requiring traditional linguistic formulas. The gradual disappearance of these inscriptions reflects the eventual triumph of Latin, even in remote areas, as Roman cultural influence penetrated every aspect of Italian society through military service, commercial relationships, and administrative requirements. The persistence of Etruscan religious traditions within Roman culture represented one of the most significant forms of cultural continuity that survived political conquest and linguistic transformation. Roman officials continued to consult Etruscan haruspices during major political crises throughout the Republican period, their expertise in interpreting sacrificial omens providing guidance that Roman religious authorities could not supply through their own traditions. The Etruscan Disciplina maintained its reputation for accuracy and comprehensiveness, even as Roman religious practices evolved to incorporate Greek philosophical concepts and Oriental mystery religions that offered alternative approaches to divine communication. The College of Haruspices, established in Rome during the 1st century BC, institutionalized Etruscan religious expertise within Roman governmental structures, while ensuring the preservation of traditional knowledge that might otherwise have disappeared with the decline of independent Etruscan political institutions. The 60 haruspices who comprised this college came primarily from ancient Etruscan families who had maintained their religious traditions through generations of political upheaval. Their appointment by Roman magistrates representing official recognition of their specialized capabilities. The training programs they conducted for younger practitioners required mastery of complex interpretive systems that connected observed phenomena with divine intentions, their instruction preserving detailed knowledge of Etruscan theological concepts that influenced Roman religious thought for centuries. The integration of Etruscan religious practices with Roman state ceremonies created syncretic traditions that enrich Roman religious life, while preserving essential elements of Etruscan spiritual heritage. The triumph ceremonies that celebrated major military victories incorporated Etruscan elements, including the painted face of the triumphant general, the purple-bordered toga, and the ritual purification procedures that preceded the public procession. The foundation ceremonies for new cities and colonies retained Etruscan requirements for ritual ploughing of boundaries, consecration of sacred spaces, and orientation of major buildings according to cosmic principles that ensured divine approval for human settlements. The influence of Etruscan religious concepts on Roman imperial ideology became particularly evident during the Augustan period, as the first emperor adopted traditional symbols of authority that derived from Etruscan royal regalia, while incorporating divination practices that legitimized his political innovations through supernatural sanction. The lictors who preceded Roman magistrates carried fasces that originated in Etruscan ceremonial traditions, their axes and bundled rods symbolizing the life and death authority that rulers exercised over their subjects. The augural practices that preceded major governmental decisions retained Etruscan techniques for observing bird flight patterns and interpreting natural phenomena as communications from divine forces concerned with human political arrangements. The economic transformation of former Etruscan territories through integration into Roman commercial networks generated prosperity that encouraged cooperation while providing resources for continued territorial expansion. The Roman road system that connected Etruscan cities with administrative centres throughout Italy facilitated military movements and commercial activities that bound these regions economically to Roman markets while enabling rapid deployment of forces to suppress local disturbances. The Via Aurelia, Via Cassia, and Via Clodia created transportation infrastructure that reduced travel times between major cities while providing employment for local populations during construction phases that required enormous labour forces. Agricultural production in former Etruscan territories adapted to Roman market demands while maintaining traditional cultivation techniques that had proven successful over centuries of development. The villa system that emerged during the late Republican period combined Roman architectural features with Etruscan agricultural practices, creating rural estates that produced wine, olive oil and grain for urban markets, while providing comfortable residences for wealthy landowners who divided their time between city and country properties. The slave labour forces that worked these estates often included former Etruscan farmers who had lost their independence during the conquest period, but retained valuable knowledge of local soil conditions and climatic patterns that enhanced agricultural productivity. The pottery industries that had flourished in Etruscan cities adapted to Roman stylistic preferences while maintaining technical expertise that enabled continued competitiveness in Mediterranean markets. The Aretine ware produced in workshops around Arretium during the 1st century BC featured Roman decorative motifs, executed with traditional Etruscan ceramic techniques, creating luxury tableware that found markets throughout the Roman world while providing employment for skilled craftsmen who might otherwise have lost their livelihoods through cultural transformation. The standardization of vessel forms and decorative programs reflected Roman commercial preferences while preserving manufacturing capabilities that had distinguished Etruscan workshops for generations. Metalworking industries in former Etruscan territories continued to exploit local mineral resources while adapting their products to Roman military and civilian requirements. The iron mines on Elba remained productive under Roman administration, their output supporting both local manufacturing and export to other Roman territories that lacked adequate mineral resources. The bronze workshops in cities like Volci and Populonia produced military equipment, agricultural tools and decorative objects that met Roman specifications while maintaining technical standards that had established their international reputations during the period of Etruscan independence. The social changes that accompanied Romanization affected different segments of Etruscan society in varying ways, with aristocratic families generally benefiting from opportunities for advancement, while lower social classes experienced disruption of traditional relationships and economic arrangements. The clientelar system that governed relationships between wealthy patrons and their dependents adapted to Roman legal frameworks while maintaining personal bonds that provided security and advancement opportunities for individuals who demonstrated loyalty and competence. Former Etruscan slaves who achieved manumission under Roman law often retained connections to their former masters' families while gaining legal rights and economic opportunities that had been unavailable under traditional Etruscan social arrangements. The urban development that transformed former Etruscan cities during the late Republican and early Imperial period created architectural landscapes that proclaimed Roman authority while incorporating elements of local building traditions that maintained visual continuity with ancestral heritage. The forums constructed in cities like Vlatere and Cortona featured colonnaded porticos, basilicas and temples that followed Roman architectural principles while utilizing local building materials and construction techniques that reflected regional preferences. The theatres and amphitheatres built for public entertainment combined Roman structural innovations with decorative programs that acknowledged local cultural traditions while promoting Roman values and social arrangements. The educational opportunities available to Etruscan youth expanded significantly under Roman rule, as municipal governments established schools that provided instruction in Latin literature, rhetoric, and legal principles necessary for advancement in Roman society. The curriculum included Greek authors whose works formed the foundation of Roman intellectual culture, but teachers often supplemented these materials with references to Etruscan historical traditions and cultural achievements that maintained local pride while encouraging adaptation to Roman expectations. The scholarships and patronage systems that enabled promising students to pursue advanced education in Rome created pathways for social mobility that had been limited under traditional Etruscan political arrangements. The military service requirements that Roman citizenship entailed provided Etruscan youth with opportunities for advancement, while ensuring their integration into Roman institutional structures that promoted loyalty to the state rather than local communities. The auxiliary units that incorporated former Etruscan warriors into Roman armies utilized their specialized skills and local knowledge while exposing them to Roman military discipline and organizational methods that enhanced their effectiveness as soldiers. The veterans' benefits that rewarded faithful service included land grants, citizenship extensions to family members, and preferential treatment in legal proceedings that created long-term incentives for cooperation with Roman authorities. The marriage patterns that developed among Romanized Etruscan families reflected the complex negotiations required to balance traditional obligations with new opportunities for social advancement through connections with Roman political networks. Intermarriage between Etruscan and Roman families became increasingly common during the 1st century BC, creating kinship relationships that facilitated political cooperation while preserving elements of Etruscan cultural identity through domestic practices and religious observances. The dowry arrangements and inheritance patterns that governed these unions required expertise in both Roman law and traditional Etruscan customs, creating legal complexities that provided employment for specialists who could navigate the intersection of different cultural systems. The transformation of Etruscan cultural identity through marriage patterns and legal adaptations represented only the surface of profound changes that would ultimately preserve essential elements of Etruscan civilization within the expanding framework of Roman imperial culture. As the last generation of native Etruscan speakers passed away during the early decades of the 1st century AD, their linguistic heritage disappeared from daily conversation, yet the deeper structural influences of their civilization had already become so thoroughly integrated into Roman institutions that they would persist for centuries, shaping everything from architectural principles to religious practices across the Mediterranean world and beyond. The survival of Etruscan religious traditions within Roman imperial culture proved remarkably durable, extending far beyond the formal consultation of haruspices during political crises to encompass fundamental concepts about divine-human relationships that influence Roman theological development throughout the Republican and imperial periods. The Etruscan emphasis on interpreting divine will through systematic observation of natural phenomena provided Roman officials with practical tools for legitimizing political decisions while maintaining public confidence in governmental authority. The elaborate ceremonies surrounding imperial appointments, military campaigns, and urban construction projects retained Etruscan elements that connected Roman power with supernatural sanction, creating continuity between ancient Italian religious traditions and the evolving requirements of Mediterranean empire. Roman architectural practices incorporated Etruscan engineering techniques and design principles so thoroughly that distinguishing between indigenous Roman innovations and adapted Etruscan traditions became increasingly difficult for later generations of builders and theorists. The arch construction methods that enabled Roman engineers to create the massive infrastructure projects that characterized imperial expansion derived directly from Etruscan technical knowledge. their understanding of load distribution and structural stability, providing the foundation for aqueducts, bridges, and public buildings that proclaimed Roman power while serving practical administrative requirements. The Pantheon in Rome, completed during Hadrian's reign, exemplified this architectural synthesis by combining traditional Etruscan emphasis on interior space with Greek decorative elements and Roman engineering capabilities to create structures that influenced building design throughout Europe for subsequent millennia. The temple architecture that characterized Roman religious buildings throughout the empire maintained distinctively Etruscan proportions and spatial arrangements that differed markedly from Greek models, the elevated podia and deep front porticos creating visual emphasis on approach and entry that enhanced the ceremonial impact of religious observances. The triple cellar arrangement that accommodated multiple deities within single temple complexes reflected Etruscan theological concepts about divine relationships, while providing practical solutions for urban religious requirements that Roman colonial planners replicated across diverse geographical and cultural contexts. The integration of elaborate terracotta decorative systems with stone construction techniques created hybrid architectural traditions that preserved Etruscan artistic capabilities while adapting them to Roman imperial iconographic programs. Urban planning principles developed by Etruscan architects influenced Roman colonial foundations throughout the Mediterranean world. Their systematic approaches to street layout, drainage systems, and public space organization providing templates that Roman planners adapted to local conditions while maintaining consistent administrative and defensive capabilities. The grid systems that characterized Roman military camps and colonial cities incorporated religious orientation requirements derived from Etruscan practices, their alignment with cosmic principles ensuring divine approval while facilitating efficient movement of troops and supplies. The integration of residential, commercial, and sacred spaces within unified urban designs created city layouts that balance practical requirements with cultural expectations, producing urban environments that could accommodate diverse populations while maintaining Roman administrative control. The governmental practices that enabled Roman administration of vast territories incorporated Etruscan concepts about political authority and community organization that proved remarkably adaptable to different cultural contexts and geographical conditions. The magistrate system that provided executive leadership in Roman municipalities retained elements of Etruscan lucumonal authority while adapting them to Roman legal frameworks and electoral procedures. The emphasis on religious sanction for political decisions, derived from Etruscan traditions of divine consultation, provided legitimacy for Roman governmental innovations while maintaining public confidence in official authority during periods of rapid territorial expansion and cultural change. Medieval interest in Etruscan antiquities emerged gradually during the 12th and 13th centuries as Italian scholars began systematic study of ancient inscriptions and architectural remains that dotted the landscape of central Italy. The discovery of elaborate tomb paintings at sites like Tarquinia sparked curiosity about the sophisticated civilization that had created such artistic achievements, while the obvious antiquity of massive stone walls and drainage systems at cities like Volterra and Perugia raised questions about the technical capabilities of pre-Roman Italian peoples. Dominican and Franciscan scholars working in monastery libraries encountered references to Etruscan religious practices in classical Latin authors, their studies revealing the extent of Etruscan influence on Roman institutional development, while highlighting the gaps in contemporary knowledge about this vanished civilization. The Renaissance witnessed a dramatic intensification of interest in Etruscan culture, as humanist scholars sought to understand the full complexity of ancient Italian civilization beyond the Roman sources that had dominated medieval learning. Leon Battista Alberti's architectural treatises acknowledged Etruscan contributions to building techniques while advocating for systematic study of ancient construction methods that could enhance contemporary projects. The papal court's patronage of archaeological investigations during the 15th century led to the first organised excavations of Etruscan tombs. Their spectacular discoveries of gold jewellery, bronze mirrors, and painted decorations capturing the imagination of Renaissance collectors, while providing material evidence for the sophistication of Etruscan artistic achievement. The systematic collection and study of Etruscan inscriptions began during the 16th century as scholars like Annius of Viterbo attempted to decipher the mysterious language that appeared on thousands of funerary monuments throughout central Italy. Although early efforts at translation proved largely unsuccessful due to inadequate comparative materials and limited understanding of ancient Italian linguistic relationships, these pioneering studies established methodological approaches that would eventually enable breakthrough discoveries in Etruscan language interpretation. The compilation of inscription catalogues and the development of standardized recording techniques created scholarly resources that facilitated collaborative research while preserving textual evidence that might otherwise have been lost to weathering and vandalism. The establishment of the first museums dedicated to Etruscan antiquities during the 17th and 18th centuries reflected growing recognition of their historical significance, while providing institutional frameworks for systematic preservation and study. The Vatican Museum's Etruscan collection, assembled through papal patronage and diplomatic acquisitions, included masterpieces of bronze sculpture, painted pottery, and gold jewellery that demonstrated the technical excellence achieved by Etruscan craftsmen. The Medici collections in Florence incorporated Etruscan objects alongside Greek and Roman antiquities, their display arrangements encouraging comparative study while highlighting the distinctive characteristics that marked Etruscan artistic traditions as unique contributions to ancient Mediterranean culture. The development of scientific excavation techniques during the 19th century revolutionized Etruscan archaeology by enabling systematic recovery of contextual information that enhanced understanding of social organization, economic systems, and cultural practices. The excavations conducted by Alessandro François at Vulci during the 1830s established new standards for recording stratigraphic relationships and artifact associations while discovering spectacular painted tombs that provided unprecedented insights into Etruscan religious beliefs and mythological traditions. The François tomb, with its elaborate narrative paintings depicting both Greek mythological scenes and Etruscan historical events, demonstrated the complex cultural synthesis that characterized mature Etruscan civilization, while raising new questions about the relationship between indigenous traditions and foreign influences. The establishment of the Istituto di Corrispondenza Archeologica in Rome during 1829 created an international scholarly network that facilitated collaboration between researchers from different countries while establishing publication standards that ensured wide dissemination of archaeological discoveries. The Institute's bulletin and annual volumes provided forums for presenting new findings, while encouraging theoretical discussions that advanced understanding of Etruscan civilization within broader contexts of ancient Mediterranean development. The participation of German, French, and British scholars alongside Italian researchers created comparative perspectives that enhanced interpretation of Etruscan material culture, while establishing methodological approaches that influenced archaeological practice throughout Europe. Modern archaeological investigations employing advanced scientific techniques have transformed understanding of Etruscan civilization by providing quantitative data about population levels, economic activities, and environmental relationships that earlier scholars could only speculate about. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted at major Etruscan sites have revealed the extent of urban development while identifying previously unknown structures that expand knowledge of city planning and architectural capabilities. Geophysical prospection techniques have located hundreds of previously unknown tombs, while enabling non-invasive assessment of their contents and preservation conditions, creating opportunities for selective excavation that maximizes information recovery while minimizing damage to fragile archaeological deposits. Chemical analysis of Etruscan pottery, metalwork, and other artifacts has provided detailed information about manufacturing techniques, raw material sources, and trade relationships that illuminate the economic foundations of Etruscan prosperity. Neutron activation analysis of ceramic vessels has identified clay sources and production centres while revealing the extent of commercial networks that distributed Etruscan products throughout the Mediterranean world. Metallurgical studies of bronze objects have documented the sophisticated alloy compositions and manufacturing techniques that enabled Etruscan smiths to create works of extraordinary technical and artistic quality, their expertise influencing metalworking traditions across ancient Europe. Isotope analysis of human remains from Etruscan cemeteries has provided insights into diet, migration patterns, and population dynamics that complement traditional archaeological evidence, while addressing fundamental questions about Etruscan origins and demographic development. Strontium isotope ratios and tooth enamel have identified individuals who migrated to Etruscan cities from other regions, while revealing the extent of population mobility that characterized ancient Mediterranean societies. Carbon and nitrogen isotope analysis of bone collagen has documented dietary patterns that reflect social stratification, while providing evidence for agricultural practices and food distribution systems that sustained urban populations. DNA studies of Etruscan skeletal remains have addressed long-standing debates about population origins while revealing complex patterns of genetic continuity and change that reflect both indigenous development and external influences. Mitochondrial DNA analysis has identified genetic lineages that connect Etruscan populations with both Central Italian and Eastern Mediterranean groups, supporting theories of cultural development that involved multiple population sources rather than simple migration or indigenous evolution. Y chromosome studies have provided complementary evidence for male lineage patterns that suggest complex demographic processes involving both local continuity and external genetic contributions that shaped Etruscan population structure over centuries of cultural development. The application of digital technologies to Etruscan studies has created new possibilities for data analysis, visualization, and public engagement that enhance both scholarly research and popular understanding of this ancient civilization. Three-dimensional scanning of tomb paintings and sculptures has enabled detailed analysis of artistic techniques while creating digital archives that preserve visual information for future generations of scholars. Virtual reality reconstructions of Etruscan cities and buildings have provided immersive experiences that help contemporary audiences understand the spatial relationships and visual impact of ancient architectural environments while supporting educational programs that promote public interest in archaeological research. Geographic information systems analysis of Etruscan settlement patterns has revealed the sophisticated understanding of landscape relationships that guided site selection and territorial organization throughout Etruscan history. The integration of topographic data with archaeological evidence has demonstrated the strategic considerations that influenced urban placement, while highlighting the environmental factors that shaped agricultural and commercial development. Network analysis of site distributions has identified hierarchical relationships between major cities and smaller settlements, while revealing the communication and transportation systems that connected Etruscan communities across diverse geographical regions. Contemporary scholarly debates about Etruscan civilization continue to evolve as new evidence challenges traditional interpretations while raising fresh questions about cultural development, political organization, and social structure. The relationship between Etruscan and Roman cultures remains a subject of active research, with scholars examining the mechanisms through which Etruscan institutions influenced Roman development while assessing the extent of cultural continuity that survived political conquest. Recent studies have emphasized the agency of Etruscan communities in adapting to Roman rule while maintaining cultural identity, challenging earlier narratives that portrayed Romanization as simple cultural replacement rather than complex negotiation between different traditions. The significance of gender relationships in Etruscan society has attracted increasing scholarly attention as researchers examine the evidence for women's roles in political, religious and economic activities that distinguished Etruscan culture from contemporary Mediterranean societies. Tomb paintings and inscriptions that document women's participation in public ceremonies, property ownership and family authority have prompted reconsideration of ancient gender systems, while highlighting the diversity of social arrangements that characterized different ancient cultures. The preservation of maternal lineage information in Etruscan naming systems has provided evidence for kinship structures that accorded women greater recognition than was typical in Greek or early Roman societies. The ongoing significance of Etruscan studies for understanding pre-Roman Italy extends beyond purely historical interests to encompass broader questions about cultural development, ethnic identity, and political organization that remain relevant for contemporary scholarship. The Etruscan experience of maintaining cultural identity while adapting to external political control provides comparative perspectives for understanding similar processes in other historical contexts, their strategies for cultural preservation offering insights into the dynamics of cultural change under conditions of political subordination. The sophisticated urban planning and environmental management techniques developed by Etruscan communities continue to inform discussions about sustainable development and landscape management in contemporary Italy. The influence of Etruscan civilization on early Mediterranean development represents a crucial component of European cultural heritage that extends far beyond the territorial boundaries of ancient Etruria to encompass architectural, artistic, and institutional traditions that shaped Western civilization. The Roman adoption and adaptation of Etruscan governmental practices, religious concepts, and technical innovations created cultural syntheses that influenced political and social development throughout the Roman Empire, while establishing precedents that continue to influence European institutional development long after the fall of Rome itself. The democratic elements present in Etruscan political systems, the sophisticated approaches to urban planning and infrastructure development, and the integration of the religious authority with secular governance, provided models that influenced constitutional development and administrative practices across subsequent centuries of European history. The preservation of Etruscan cultural memory through Roman institutional continuity ensured that essential elements of this ancient civilization would survive the collapse of the Roman Empire to influence medieval and modern European development. The architectural principles that governed church construction, the ceremonial traditions that legitimized political authority, and the legal concepts that protected individual rights all retained traces of Etruscan origins that connected contemporary European culture with its ancient Italian foundations. The rediscovery and systematic study of Etruscan civilization during the Renaissance and subsequent centuries has enriched understanding of this cultural heritage, while demonstrating the enduring relevance of ancient achievements for contemporary society. The Etruscan legacy ultimately represents one of the foundational elements of Western civilization. Their contributions to architecture, engineering, religion, and governance providing essential components of the cultural synthesis that emerged from ancient Mediterranean interactions. Their sophisticated understanding of urban planning, their innovative approaches to artistic expression, and their complex theological systems created cultural achievements that influenced human development far beyond their original geographical and temporal boundaries. The ongoing archaeological investigation of Etruscan sites continues to reveal new aspects of their remarkable civilization, while confirming their crucial role in shaping the cultural foundations of European society, ensuring that their legacy will continue to enrich human understanding of ancient achievement and cultural development for generations to come.